On the ocean, pirates had three iconic common interests: liquor, women, and gambling. Alger Wilson merely took out his silver pocket watch, flipped it open, and knew where he should go first. At 11:15, the brothels and bars hadn't opened. Only the gambling dens would have easily gathered a bunch of people who wanted to make a fortune. Alger was more familiar with this port city than his tiny hometown. He proceeded without stopping at all while he navigated his way, smoothly turning at every corner until he arrived outside a casino that was located in a secluded alley. According to what he knew, the owner of this casino was a gang leader with a deep background. He had an inexplicable but indistinct connection with the important figure at the Governor General's office. It was the first choice for many pirates to purchase and sell their stolen goods. Because of this, pirates often appeared here. They might exchange their loot for gold pounds in the morning, but they would lose everything at night and get thrown out. Alger pulled on his thick brown coat, pressed down his cap, a piece of fashion where that came from the mainland, and pushed open the half-closed door. Under the watchful gaze of the bouncers, he entered the casino. Casinos were prohibited within the Lone Kingdom. They could only be attached to bars as rooms, but in the kingdom's vast overseas colonies, not only were they legal, but they were also a mainstay industry. Among them, Byam of the Rorstad Archipelago and Aelva of East Balam were the most famous in the area. Many tycoons would specially visit them from Backland or Mid-Seashire's coast for a big day of gambling. Surveying the area, Alger saw a variety of card games, as well as dice-derived turntable games. As it was still early, there weren't many gamblers, and Alger quickly scanned them all. Suddenly, his eyes lit up, and he instantly recognized the identity of a disguised person. He took off his hat, walked up to a Texas poker table, and patted his target's shoulder. He bent down and whispered into the man's ear, "Blazing." Danitz happened to be flipping the corner of his card with his right hand, so he almost jumped out of his skin from the slap and nearly sent a fireball towards the guy behind him. After he had been attacked by Steel Mavady, he knew that he shouldn't seek out information with his true appearance, as he could be targeted by greedy pirates. Although most pirates weren't strong and didn't register as a threat to Danitz, he still didn't want to reveal himself, lest it set back the plan of hunting Steel Mavady. However, to his surprise, the disguise he took great effort to don was exposed just an hour after he left home. He turned his head quickly to the side and glanced through the corner of his eye at the person who had greeted him. When he saw the signature seaweed-like dark blue hair, Danitz relaxed a little and turned to observe if the other players had heard the greeting. The gamblers were all carefully studying their hidden card, either folding or continuing, with none of them paying attention to what was happening over at his side. "Why are you here?" Danitz asked casually. He and Alger had met at the previous private meet, and he knew that the other party had a ghost ship and a dozen sailors. He was quite a powerful but unknown fellow. According to Vice Admiral Iceberg's judgment, if such a small and weak pirate crew was able to retain an ancient ghost ship, it meant that they were backed by a powerful faction. Perhaps they were members of the Church of Storms, or perhaps they were related to a particular pirate king or secret organization. They usually disguised themselves as ordinary pirates and gathered information for who they were really loyal to. It was easy to wipe any traces of themselves clean at scheduled times, and at times, do things inconvenient for the power backing them. For example, silencing others or plundering certain special items. There were quite a few pirate crews like this, and no one would particularly be bothered about such matters. Alger pulled over a nearby chair and sat down. He tilted his head and asked in a low voice, "I heard that your captain obtained Death's key?" Danitz snorted with a laugh. "I thought you had a brain, but you've disappointed me. How can such a thing be so easily obtainable? We'll definitely sell it if you want it and offer a decent price. How about it? Do you want to consider this deal?" Alger casually said, "Perhaps it has other secrets. Maybe someone wants to deal with your captain. Who knows? Dog's hit." Annoyed by his new hand, Danitz cursed out loud. Then, he suppressed his voice and said, "That thing doesn't seem like a creation made by humans. It might belong to the giants or devils." "Creation? Your captain still insists on teaching language to all of you?" Alger asked with amusement. The rumor was that Vice Admiral Iceberg was a woman who was very strict when it came to knowledge. She couldn't stand the sight of a bunch of illiterates under her command, so every day on the Golden Dream, there was a class of general knowledge and reading, and every day she forced the crew to take turns participating. Wishing he could forget it, Danitz said, it's much more difficult than fighting. Because of this, we're usually unable to recruit enough crew members. Every time we dock at the port to resupply, there will be people who resign. He didn't continue with the topic. Looking at the dealer, he said to himself, help me keep an eye out for Steele's whereabouts. Steele Mavady? Admiral of Blood's second mate? Alger looked down at Blazing's left arm, which was slightly propped up with a splint, and asked, were you attacked? For the key? His brain has already been eaten by his zombies. Danitz stressed. You want to seek revenge on him? Alger guessed from the other's tone and request. Hee. Danitz smiled without a reply, looking as though he was concentrating on his new hidden card. Alger thought for a moment before saying, the last time your captain appeared was 7 days ago, near Sonia Island. This was confirmed by a telegram. The Golden Dream wouldn't arrive in Byam that quickly. Do you have a new helper? If it's just you alone, then you aren't a match for Steele even if he were alone. And as you know, he's always attended to by a crowd. Towards Alger's question, Danitz's response was to throw out a chip. Call. Who is it? Alger first assumed that Danitz's attitude was a tacit agreement. He pinned his hopes by asking since it was a riskless endeavor. Danitz stared at the exposed cards and answered simply, you wouldn't know. I wouldn't know? Someone who has the strength to deal with Steele Mavady should be someone with a little fame at sea regardless of if they're a pirate or an adventurer. Unless they belong to a specific secret organization, or it's their first time traveling the seas. Of course, it's also possible that Danitz doesn't wish to answer, for fear of exposing a secret. That's most probable. Someone belonging to a particular organization, first time traveling the seas, with the strength to deal with Steele Mavady. Alger looked up slightly as he suddenly had a bold guess. He tapped on the edge of the table and asked, as if he were chatting about the weather, was Bansi Harbor fun? He emphasized the word fun. Danitz turned his head in surprise and blurted out, how did you know? He believed that with the Church of Storm's style, it was impossible for it to air dirty linen. Furthermore, the passengers of the White Agate had just arrived last night. The people who had witnessed the developments had all signed confidentiality agreements, so how could the news spread so quickly? Alger smiled without answering. At this moment, he understood the value of Emperor Rozel's words, boldly hypothesize and carefully verify. Danitz put away his winnings and muttered, it's no big deal. There was a revival of some ancient customs that led to the fall of a storm bishop. As expected. Alger chuckled and said, I'll help you keep an eye out for Steele. But how can I contact you? 15, Amiris Avenue is an unoccupied house. Write the information on a piece of paper and throw it in, Danitz answered hesitantly. Alger nodded and stood up while patting Blazing Danitz on the shoulder. Don't forget my payment. He turned around and walked towards the door. Watching the captain of the ghost ship depart, Danitz couldn't help but grumble. This fellow isn't bad. However, I have to leave this place too. He couldn't quite trust Alger. Perhaps in a few minutes, he might lead Steele Mavady and his pirates to rush over. After leaving the casino, Alger, who was wearing a pair of local baggy pantaloons, strolled down the street. He entered a department store and found a counter. He smiled and took out a handful of bronze pennies. Give me a deck of tarot cards. While he was waiting, he leisurely thought of a question. Find authorized novels and web novel faster updates. Better experience, please click www.novelhall.com for visiting. What is the adorer of Mr. the Fool doing at this time? In Old John's restaurant. Klein watched as the waiter placed a plate of grilled fish in front of him. It was wrapped with something that looked like straw and covered with all sorts of spices, some of which he didn't recognize. The strong aroma seeped into Klein's nose and greatly enhanced his salivation. as expected of the Spice Archipelago. Klein was about to pick up his knife and fork when he saw the waiter place two things resembling tree branches on his plate. Chopsticks? Klein was shocked. Then he quickly locked on to the suspect, Roselle Gustav. This is the kind of cutlery you have to use when eating grilled stickleback. It's said that Emperor Roselle gained inspiration from the customs of the elves, the waiter introduced. The customs of the elves? They are indeed a race that likes cooking and eating delicacies. Or rather, it's purely an excuse Roselle came up with. Klein guessed, largely as a result of his understanding of that particular person's character. In the morning, he had gone to a few church hospitals in Byam to provide hospice care for some dying people, to help them fulfill their wishes, and to engage in a deeper level of acting, but he had failed to find a suitable target. This wasn't to say that no one died in the hospital, but rather it was that they all had relatives who either accompanied them or had witnessed their deaths. There was no possibility of disguising himself as the deceased apart from giving people a fright. I'll head to the bar where adventurers gather. There should be many foreigners who might die in a dark corner like stray dogs in order to pursue wealth at sea, while their families might never hear of them again. Klein suppressed his thoughts and focused on his delicious food. The quality of Sickleback's meat was certainly not as good as that of Murloc meat, but the spices synergized to form clear layered flavors which Klein was rather delighted to have tasted. He just couldn't stop himself from eating after the first bite. Actually, there are some local Beyonders who wish to leave this dangerous circle and lead a normal life. It's completely possible for them to head to Backland and open a roasted cuisine restaurant, selling grilled fish as their specialty. With the city's acceptance for many things, their business definitely wouldn't be bad. The only problem is that many spices aren't as cheap as they are here. The cost will be very high, and a location has to be chosen to cater to the target group. Klein put down his rather crude chopsticks and wiped his mouth with a napkin, letting his mind wander. In his view, commoners were unable to find the means to get rich, mostly because they didn't have enough vision. However, one's vision was also limited by the education they received and their daily experiences. Bound by social class, it was really hard to escape from it and break through this limitation. The most effective way was to strive for a higher level of education, and the second was to take risks and head out on an adventure. Of course, the risk was huge, and many people vanished silently while taking this path. Klein spent 2 soldi and 5 pence for this meal, which wasn't cheap, but he had always been willing to spend money on good food. Besides, his main expenses had been paid for by Danitz recently. Pulling at his collar, putting on his hat, and holding his black cane, he walked out of Old John's restaurant, just in time to see a police officer driving a tramp out of the street. The natives of the Rorsted archipelago had darker skin than the people of the southern continent. It was close to the kind of bronze which was often a result of exposure to the sun. Their hair was mostly dark and naturally curled ever so slightly. They were quite different from the colonists from the Lone Kingdom. It has been less than 50 years since the place had been completely colonized. At first, Lone had worked with the local kings and chieftains, under the name of the Mid-Sonia Company to extract economic benefits, but later, the management of the company quickly fell into corruption as they fought for power, even provoking the enemy for personal gain by starting a war. Even what was even more absurd was that they would report each other, claiming that their competitors had received bribes. With regards to this, they would find a member of parliament backing them. During parliamentary hearings, they would attack each other, something that nearly resulted in visiting. There weren't many customers, so Klein easily made his way through the tables to the bar. He discovered that what was different from the other places was that there were 3 blackboards on the side of the bar that were supported by wooden shelves. Sitting on them were yellowing notices in white, with a variety of content, strange and varied. Some were hiring bodyguards, some were seeking help in finding people, some were investigating the situation on a particular island, and some were offering a high reward for the head of a particular pirate, while others claimed that they had obtained a treasure map and wanted to form a team. In short, the affairs that had been divided up between the private detectives and security companies in the Lone Kingdom still belonged to the adventurers here. A glass of Zarhar. Klein tapped the surface of the bar counter. It was a local malt beer, cheap and tasty, with a unique taste. It was loved by adventurers, something Klein had learned from blazing down its 3 pence. The bartender casually glanced at the customer, not showing any change in his attitude because of the stranger's unfamiliar face. With a beer in hand, Klein sat in a high chair in front of the bar, sipping bit by bit as he quietly listened to the drinkers around him. Through their conversations, he searched for a worthy target. After nearly an hour, when the number of people in the bar increased, Klein finally heard something that might be useful. His spirit was jolted and he became increasingly focused. There were 4 people sitting at the table less than 3 meters away from him. They were feeling sorry for a man named Went. I always thought Went was out at sea. I didn't expect him to be at home. He's very sick. Sigh, if I had knocked on his door 2 days earlier, he wouldn't have died. You don't know how terrifying the room was. Mushrooms were growing on his body in huge swaths of white. Dog's hit. Stop it. Can't you see I'm eating sausages? Yes, yes, yes. Went's room was filled with bugs, moths, flies, butterflies, bees, and cockroaches. Holy Lord of Storms, I couldn't believe this was a place where a human can live. Even the police who came later were stunned. As the conversation passed into his ears, Klein slightly frowned, feeling that Went's death wasn't normal. Within a few days of his death, his corpse was already filled with mushrooms, and insects were crawling all over the room. Something beyond or related? With such an anomaly, the police would definitely report the matter to the mandated Punisher team. It sounds like it happened 3 or 4 days ago. The things that needed to be taken care of should have been dealt with already. Klein seriously considered whether he should pay a visit to take a look. At the very least, the man called Went was a lone adventurer and by him. None of his peers wished to help him transmit the news of his death. After listening for a long time, he gained a rough idea of where the place Went rented was. It was at the nearby 47, Blackhorn Street. Having finished drinking the last drop of the Zarhar beer, Klein put on his hat, left the bar, and headed for the apartment. After entering the door, he half closed his eyes and murmured to himself, the room that recently had someone die in. He repeated the statement 7 times in a row, used his cane to quickly and easily arrive outside the room where Went used to live. It hadn't been rented out yet, and the anomaly inside had already been dealt with. There seemed to be nothing wrong with it. Klein put away the note he had used to open the door, locked the door behind him, and walked around carefully. After confirming the situation, he took out extract, essential oils, herbs, powders, and special candles, and he quickly set up a spirit channeling ritual in front of the bed. Although it had been several days, making it only possible for him to obtain the most superficial, disjointed, and remnant bits of information, Klein thought that it was better to have some than nothing. Without a doubt, he prayed to himself and entered the space above the gray fog. He responded and gave himself the power to channel the spirit. The flame of the candle suddenly soared, tinged with a ghostly blue as it swayed. Klein only felt everything fall silent, as if he had entered a realm that didn't belong to reality. His pupils were completely black, and even the whites of his eyes had been expelled. He no longer needed to use the technique of dream divination. Having advanced to faceless, with the help of the gray fog that made an initial entry into the real world, he was able to directly see the lingering spirituality of Went, a will that refused to dissipate. There were 3 scenes. One was of a tall, thin, dark, curly-haired, sharp-featured Went coming to the body of a discarded corpse, astonished to see a glimmer from it before it condensed into a green gem filled with an aura of vitality. The second scene was of Went lying on his bed with his eyes closed, his mouth slightly open. His skin was covered with mushrooms of all kinds, the surrounding cockroaches and moths piled on top of each other, and on his chest, a silver necklace embedded with the same green gem from before. The third scene was of a pretty girl with flaxen-colored hair sitting at the edge of the sea with her eyes slightly moist. Lingering around her was Went's reluctant voice. "Rain, I'm about to die. I'm really regretful that I never told you that I love you. I want you to marry me." The picture shattered, and the spirit channeling came to an end. Klein looked around and saw that the house was still dark and gloomy. This fellow is truly unlucky. Klein shook his head and sighed. He already had a rough idea of the cause of Wen's death, his random act of picking up something. The vast majority of Beyonders didn't know about the law of Beyonder characteristics conservation and indestructibility, and they had never thought that the deceased of their kind would be able to release a characteristic that could become an ingredient. As this process was relatively slow, it was easy for them to be missed. Therefore, after killing a Beyonder, they would usually search the corpse and throw it away, making passers-by like Wen to luck out or some other creatures at the bottom of the sea or in the wilderness. Wen didn't know that it was a Beyonder characteristic, and he had thought it to be a magical gem, thus, he made a necklace and kept it close to his body. Slowly, he was corrupted by the influence and died in agony. Author note: this is what the British East India Company did in India. As expected of a bureaucratic empire, it has everything you need in this area. I nearly laughed myself to death when doing the research. By the time he left 47, Blackhorn Street, Klein had figured out Wen's general situation. Find authorized novels and web novel faster updates. Better experience. Please click www.novelhall.com for visiting. He had disguised himself as a police officer and learned from Wen's neighbors. Simeem Island, the island at the farthest end of the Rorstad archipelago. From Byam it'll take 4 to 5 hours to get there by liner, and there are only 2 trips a day, at 9 a.m. and 10 a.m., respectively. Wen's parents are long dead and he has no relatives. The only person involved is a girl he just can't forget, Rain. She's the perfect target for my first performance of acting as someone else. But just thinking about how I need to confess on Wen's behalf, it feels so awkward. If the girl agrees. Damn, how am I supposed to wrap things up? Klein thought with a troubled expression. He tried to recall the novels he had read and the movies and TV dramas he had watched, hoping for the most perfect solution. Soon, he had a general idea of what to do, stabilizing his mood in the process. His thoughts began to drift towards the matter regarding Steel Mavati. I hope Miss Magician will get a radio transceiver as soon as possible. Klein sighed silently and got onto a rental carriage. Backland, Sherwood Borough. Furs opened a letter Zio had brought back. It came from the science fiction novelist, Avil, who was pleased to share with Ma'am Wall the future development and applications of radio technology. Furs directly skipped over the beginning and middle content, her eyes sweeping over to the end. He introduced 3 types, with detailed addresses and approximate prices. The most expensive is just £12. Furs nodded slightly, feeling that this wasn't a very important business transaction. She suddenly felt her self-esteem was a little inflated. Perhaps because she had seen so many hundreds and thousands of pounds transactions in the Tarot Club, she no longer paid much notice to anything in the range of £10. Mr. World has the resources and finances. In the future, I might need to buy items from him or sell things I don't need. Yes, I'll just add postage, my transportation costs, and the price of the materials expended for the ritual to the original price. Furs made up her mind quickly, and she subconsciously looked out of the window. Backland was still gloomy and dark, with a light drizzle pattering down. However, the fog wasn't as thick as it was before. I wonder when I'll receive the Spirit Eater's stomach pouch from the sun. Furs couldn't wait to advance. In the Berg household in the City of Silver. Having already prepared the Spirit Eater's stomach pouch and the materials Mr. Hanged Man wished to acquire, Derek was in no hurry to sacrifice them to Mr. Fool. He planned to wait a little longer, until the chief was leading an expedition team or was presiding over a particular sacrificial ritual, before making an attempt. This is the safest and most reliable way. Yes, be careful, be cautious. Derek reminded himself before flipping open the Giant King's Court, Book of Blackrock, hand-copied edition. Recently, he had been reading this ancient tome. From it, he was able to understand some of the faces of the Giant King's Court from ancient times. According to the ancient tome, it was a court of God. Time seemed to have frozen there, as though it was suspended in eternal dusk. All the buildings were extremely grand and magnificent, even reaching into the clouds. Humans who walked inside were exceptionally small, and they revered the owner of this scene from the bottom of their hearts. Backland, Hillston Borough, Waymandy's house. After listening to an explanation, Emlyn White combed his hair with his hand and intentionally asked, "Lord Baron, I forgot where I heard it from, but there was a very famous city named the City of Silver during the Second Epoch or in the early half of the Third Epoch." Waymandy was a vampire baron whose age exceeded 200 years. He didn't look old, and he instead looked like a mature gentleman in his early 30s. His black hair was neatly combed back, and he was wearing a dark red cotton shirt with a brown pipe in his hand. As he enjoyed the warmth of the fireplace, he said thoughtfully, "No, at least in my memory, there's no City of Silver before the Cataclysm." Before Emlyn could even revel in his joy, Waymandy went on to say to himself, "But there was a kingdom of silver which was originally ruled by the giant king's court and later came under its jurisdiction." Kingdom of Silver? Emlyn White thought for a while and said, "Lord Baron, is there anything more specific?" Waymandy looked up at him, smiled, and said reminiscently, "The Kingdom of Silver had a rather special position in the giant king's court. They didn't directly believe in the giant king, Ormer, and instead, they believed in the giant king's court's queen, Omabella. City of Generosity, Byam, Dock Area. Acid Lemon Street, Wind of Azure Inn." Klein stood at the corner of the street, undid the topaz pendant on his left wrist, and divined to ensure that there was no danger ahead. With that in mind, he strolled back to the inn, went up to the third floor, and opened the door of the luxurious suite. He was slightly surprised to find Blazing Danitz already back, slumped in his reclining chair, drinking. After a moment of consideration, Klein calmly asked, "What time is it?" "Isn't there a clock?" Danitz muttered. He looked at the wall opposite him and read out the time. 3:40 p.m. Before he finished his sentence, Danitz suddenly came to his senses, sat up straight, and laughed dryly. "I've already gone to the places I can get information from and asked the people I can ask. There's no need to stay outside any longer. It will increase the risk of exposure and affect your hunting plan." Klein found a chair and sat down, and he expressionlessly said, "Tell me what happened. What problems could there be? Although I'm mainly an adventurer who hunts treasure, I'm also a qualified part-time pirate." Danitz felt that his abilities had been insulted. After being swept by Gehrman Sparrow with a cold glance, he smiled and gave a brief overview of the places he went, the people he met, and the news he had heard from the morning and afternoon. Hearing Danitz sigh that a captain of a ghost ship named Alger knew about Bansi Harbor, Klein suddenly wanted to frown. "With Mr. Hanged Man's relationship with the Church of Storms, even before I controlled the world and actively mentioned it, he didn't know about the anomaly at Bansi Harbor, so how could this Alger have known? Is he some powerhouse of higher standing in the Church of Storms who's disguised as a pirate, or someone who has some sort of relationship with the heretics in Bansi Harbor? Mr. Hanged Man has been active in the surrounding seas, so there's a possibility that it's him." Klein's heart stirred as he recalled the characteristics of the Hanged Man. Above the gray fog, although he couldn't clearly see the other members' appearances, it was still obvious as to whether they were men or women and what their hair color was. Klein raised his hand to stop Danitz from speaking. He said in a low voice, "Very messy hair, dark blue in color? You know him? That guy isn't simple." Danitz sighed. "As expected. Haha, I really didn't expect to meet him so easily." Klein didn't respond. Instead, he leaned forward and said, "Continue." Without thinking too much into it, Danitz gave a general description of what happened afterward and explained himself. "As you know, no one can be sure when they'll get anything when trying to get information. After finding everyone who could be found, the only thing one can do is wait patiently. This will definitely take a while. There's another solution that doesn't require waiting," Klein deliberately said in a flat tone. "What solution?" Danitz asked in surprise. Klein nudged his gold-rimmed glasses, the corners of his mouth curving into a smile. "Use bait." "Bait?" Danitz looked at him, momentarily puzzled. In just a second, he had come to his senses. Only he could be the bait. As for fishing for the enemy, no one cared if the bait was actually swallowed or not. One only cared if the prey could be pulled out. Simply put, bait was a highly risky species. Haha, that's not a great solution. Yes, that's what my intuition tells me. I should be able to gain something from the Red Theater. I'll go over there to take a look. Danitz took his coat as he eagerly rushed out the door. Klein originally wanted to tail far behind Blazing and see if he could find any clues, but suddenly he heard layers of illusory prayers. It came from a man. Klein paused thoughtfully and turned into the washroom. 10 seconds later, he appeared above the gray fog. He saw the crimson star that represented the hanged man constantly burgeoning and shrinking. As expected, Klein sat down, leaned back in his chair, and emanated his spirituality. The voice of the hanged man became clearer. Honorable Mr. Fool, I'm currently instigating a key related to Vice Admiral Iceberg. I met Blazing Danitz at a casino and learned that he was a witness at the anomaly in Bansi Harbor. I also learned that he plans to join forces with a powerful figure to deal with Steel Mavati. I suspect that Blazing Danitz is working with your adorer, so I've prayed to you. If this is indeed the case, and if he wishes to receive a certain degree of assistance, I can be of some help. Mr. Hanged Man has indeed guessed Gehrman Sparrow's identity. He likely only had his suspicions, but he successfully obtained verification by inquiring about Bansi Harbor from Danitz. This is also good. With the help of an experienced local, the plan to hunt Steel Mavati would be much smoother. Unless it directly affects the fool, there's no meaning for the hanged man to entrap an adorer. Judging from his expression and attitude, he doesn't have any suspicions towards the fool yet. I didn't leave any loopholes. Klein's thoughts raced, and he quickly made his decision. After making a divination, he conjured the world and covered the dummy with fog. He placed him in a praying stance and answered solemnly, Honorable Mr. Fool, I am in need of some assistance. After finishing this scene, Klein threw the voice along with the scene into the crimson star symbolizing the hanged man. 5 p.m. Olive Tree Avenue, Pam's Divination Lodge. Alger Wilson pushed open a brown wooden door with panes of glass situated above it, and he entered the cafe that had a mysticism theme. He ordered a cup of Fermo coffee from the Paws Valley on the Star Highlands of the southern continent. He took out the tarot cards he had bought earlier and placed it beside him. The top card was the Hanged Man, depicting an angel hanging upside down with his hands tied behind his back. Unlike this morning, he had changed into a dark, classical robe and wore a clergyman's beretta, like a warlock or magician from folklore. After taking in a silent breath, Alger slowly sipped his coffee. He didn't show any anxiety from waiting. After about 5 or 6 minutes, the thick brown wooden door opened again, and a young man in a black tweed coat and a half-top hat came in. The gentleman's appearance wasn't even 30 years of age. His face was thin and angular. He had both a mature and gloomy temperament. It was none other than Klein, who had slightly modified his appearance and changed his persona. He wasn't wearing gold-rimmed glasses, but his eyesight was unaffected. With a casual sweep with his eyes, his gaze landed on Alger's dark blue sideburns. Klein looked down and saw the Hanged Man card placed face up on the deck. Without a word, he walked over, took off his hat, and sat down opposite Alger. He said with a grim smile, I'd like to have a divination. As he spoke, he had already taken in the appearance of the most senior member of the Tarot Club. Deep facial features, rough outline, with a clear weathered look. It's obvious he was a person adept at fighting and is often outdoors. His skin is bronze in color, but it differs from that of the natives. He's like the result of a pure Loanese being battered by the elements for years, but the dark blue hair is more peculiar, something that doesn't belong to Lone. It's closer to the colonists of Desi Bay who live in Berserk Sea region. Mixed blood. Klein made his judgment. Alger looked at the gentleman across him, slowly superimposing his image with that of the world. Then, he pushed out the tarot card and said in a low voice, This requires you to shuffle and cut your own cards. Klein reached out and picked them up, spreading them fully to take them in. Following that, he gathered them together and did a reshuffle. He cut the cards continuously, took out 3 cards, and placed them in an arrangement of past, present, and future. Klein slowly leaned back, but he turned over the middle tarot card with his right hand. It showed a naked woman wearing only a purple silk scarf, surrounded by a green wreath like a door. This was the world, numbered 21. Number 22 returned to 0, symbolizing the Fool. How should I interpret this? Klein asked deliberately. Although the Hanged Man hadn't explicitly mentioned that the world was the adorer of the Fool, Klein didn't think it was necessary to hope otherwise. He felt that being honest about it aided in establishing his image. If Alger hadn't guessed it, then it was an act of being open and confident. If Alger already knew about the matter, it would make the world appear at ease, as if everything was within his grasp. He knows I know? He already believes that I've guessed it before raising the topic above the grey fog? Impressive. Alger's heart skipped a beat as he replied at a moderate pace, it's inverted. It means that things will fail due to a lack of preparation. What kind of preparations are needed? Klein thoughtfully nodded and asked. Alger took back all the tarot cards apart from the world and skillfully reshuffled and cut the cards. Then, he flipped open the top card. It was the Hierophant. Alger's voice remained deep and low. You need advice. You need the help of faith and religion to avoid going down the wrong path. Without waiting for Klein to speak, he followed the sequence and turned over the second card. On it was the moon which overlooked the land. You will be confused, you will be exhausted, and you will be wandering in your dreams, but this is only temporary. Next, Alger handed over a third tarot card, it was the sun. Everything shall pass, and the light will shine upon the land, he spoke like a charlatan. Klein remained silent for a few seconds, then seemingly asked for confirmation, church, dream, sun? A hint of a smile spread across Alger's face. He nodded slightly and said, that's right. He had hidden hints for the follow-up plan during the tarot divination. In fact, in a situation where he had no skin in the matter and wasn't even noticed, there was no need to be so tactful. He could have described things in detail directly, but Alger felt that he still needed to test out an adorer like the world. He wanted to know if he was smart enough, rather than relying on his strength. Find authorized novels and web novel faster updates. Better experience, please click www.novelhall.com for visiting. If their intelligence were on the same level, Alger felt that they could cooperate more in the future. There was no need to talk too much between smart people, on the contrary, he would try to not involve the world in his own affairs. He would only ask for help when he needed a helper, unless Mr. Fool had other orders. Now, the world's response and previous performances had confirmed that he was sly, vicious, and experienced. I'm a tarot card expert. On such matters, Mr. Hanged Man, you're just a rookie. Klein secretly laughed, belittling him inwardly. The message hidden in the Hanged Man's interpretation was very simple. The Hierophant meant that he wanted to inform the Church of Storms about blazing Danets and Steel Mavedi, and then use the power of the mandated punishers to divide the enemy and reap the benefits. This was something Klein often used, so there was no difficulty in understanding. The moon and the sun cards which followed were a reminder and warning from the Hanged Man. Since the mandated punishers were involved, a certain amount of caution had to be taken. According to Alger's experience, his colleagues in Biome would definitely use a sealed artifact that could force many people within its range to fall into a dream, when dealing with similar issues. Mavedi's characteristic meant that there had to be a specific item in the sun domain which targeted him. I'm immune to dreams, so I'm not afraid of the sun. Klein reached out his hand and half-turned the inverted the world card, turning it into its proper position, meaning that this plan was feasible and that he would make preparations. Alger raised his head and took a deep breath. The master here specializes in aromatherapy. She can use the fragrances of different essential oils, extract, incense, and flower essence to treat corresponding emotional problems and pacify the restless mind. Do you want to try it? Using the contact point at Amiris Avenue? Klein smiled in response. Okay. The two of them looked at each other as they remained motionless. They stopped talking about the aromatherapy anymore as both of them already had everything laid out. Klein didn't stay any longer than necessary. He took out his pocket watch, looked at it, and slowly stood up. Alger wiped away his smile, pressed his hand to his chest, and slightly bowed. Let us praise God. All divination outcomes come from his revelation. Oh, you even know how to express your loyalty. Klein tried to hold back his laughter as he replied seriously, imitating Alger, let us praise God. He took 2 steps away, then suddenly stopped and looked back at Alger, chuckling as he put on his hat. Frankly, you aren't suitable for that type of attire. Ah? Alger couldn't keep up with Mr. World's train of thought. When Klein had left the themed coffee shop, Alger retracted his gaze and looked at the mirror in the corner and took a good look at himself. Initially, he didn't think there was anything wrong wearing that. However, after the World's remark, he found it more inconsistent the more he looked at himself. Finally, he understood why he had said that. A fellow, who looked boorish and hardened, one appearing capable of summoning 100 sailors at any time to beat up his opponent or bringing out an axe and chopping them into pieces, really shouldn't be wearing such a mysterious classical warlock robe. It made his bearing somewhat abnormal. Cathedral of Waves. Alger, who had changed back into his original clothes, kept a low profile and followed the worshippers into the hall. He took advantage of the act of making a confession in order to meet the bishop, Chogo, through the priest in charge. After saluting, he went straight to the point. I met Blazing Danitz, who claims that the key that Vice Admiral Iceberg possesses has nothing to do with Death's treasure and that they are even willing to sell it. He entrusted me with a mission to take note of Steel Mavadi's whereabouts. Apparently, he was injured by this second mate of the Admiral of Blood, and is in a rush to escape from his pursuit. Your Excellency, I wish to leak this news, making Steel Mavadi and his subordinates successful in cornering Blazing Danitz. And I wish to use this opportunity to capture them all or execute them on the spot. This will be able to effectively keep the arrogance of the pirates in check. Chogo revealed a look of approbation. Very good. The way you do things is better than I expected. Alger replied with a look of humility, this all stems from the Lord's guidance, and also from your teachings. In the evening, I'll find a suitable target to leak this news to. If I come to pray again, it will indicate that Steel Mavadi temporarily isn't taking action. If I do not appear, it means that I might be restrained by him or his subordinates to prevent any news from leaking. This means that they have fallen for the trap. After giving details of the location and other matters, Alger returned to the confessional and left as usual. 7:15 p.m. Amiris Leaf Bar. Alger, wearing a pair of baggy pants and a head towel wrapped around his dark blue hair, stood by a boxing ring and held a glass of Lanty-proof in his hand. With a mocking expression on his face, he looked at the 2 contestants with bruises all over. Soon, he noticed his target had entered the room and was heading straight for the bar counter. After a while, he sat down next to the thin man and said with a chuckle, I heard that Steel has arrived in Byam. The man tilted his head in alarm and replied with a fake smile, why don't I know about it? Is that so? It looks like Blazing fooled me. Alger smacked the bar counter and drank a mouthful of alcohol. Blazing Danitz? The man's eyes lit up as he asked hesitantly. Yes, that's him. Alger gritted his teeth. I met him this morning at the Gold Coin Casino. This damned fellow claimed that Steel was in Byam. Pooey! How dare he lie to me? The swarthy, thin man's eyes darted around without interrupting. He finished listening quietly, stood up, and chuckled. I forgot that I have something to do. We should have a game of cards another time. He patted Alger on the shoulder and in a seemingly unhurried manner, left the bar in a hurry. Alger held a glass of alcohol, half turning to look at his back. His eyes appeared deep and gloomy, and there were no signs of a smile at the corners of his mouth. Looking up at the wall clock and seeing that it was past 8 o'clock, Alger put down his glass mug of alcohol and pushed his way through the drunkards into the street. As the Rorstad archipelago was rich in coal, Byam was like the mainland cities of Backland and Pritz Harbor. Its streets were lined with tall black lamp posts, and the light of the burning gas effused through the metal grille, illuminating the relatively clean streets. Alger pulled off his headscarf and slowly turned into a side alley. At a dead end in the alley, he could smell the scent of urine mixed with alcohol. Although the Emiris Leaf Bar had a bathroom, it clearly wasn't enough for the customers during peak periods. Some of the drunks who couldn't hold it in could only find a secluded place to relieve themselves. Find authorized novels and webnovel faster updates. Better experience, please click www.novelhall.com for visiting. The red moonlight penetrated the clouds and shone into the alley. While Alger was still considering whether he should put on a more convincing act, a firm and pervading voice came from behind him. Did you purposely leak the information about Blazing to us? He's not stupid. Alger muttered to himself as he slowly turned around, as though preparing for a surprise attack. 7 or 8 steps away, he saw a figure leaning against the wall. The figure was about 1.78 meters in height, and it wore a boat-shaped hat. Its face was thin and sharp, and it wore a look of aggression. He had a lock of black hair hanging down, half obscuring the dark green eyes on his left side, which softened his own coldness. Even though there was often quite a difference between a wanted poster and the person in question, many famous pirates didn't even don disguises as they wandered the city. As an insider of the church, Alger had seen many almost photographic portraits drawn with rituals and had participated in pirate conventions. He was still able to successfully link the person in front of him to a name on the bounty notices. He didn't express this point and deliberately hesitated before asking, Calm Squall? He was the chief helper of Steel Mavidi, a beyonder who was good at controlling his emotions and thinking calmly, but he was also inhumane and had a 1,500 pounds reward offered for him. The man pulled at his black windbreaker and revealed an empty smile. Can I deny that? Well, probably not, just like how you can't deny that you deliberately mentioned Blazing to Amaru. He's not someone who enjoys using his brain, the complete opposite of me. I've never thought of lying. I only wish to obtain some payment for the news you received from me. Between Blazing, who's alone, and Steel, who has so many helpers, anyone with a brain would know which to choose. Of course, I wish that you keep it a secret. I don't want to be pursued by Vice Admiral Iceberg, Alger replied frankly. Squall nodded his head leisurely and said, Tell me the specifics. Just like I mentioned before. I bumped into and recognized Blazing at the Gold Coin Casino. He entrusted me to take note of Steel's whereabouts. Heh, it seems like he wishes to launch a counterattack, Alger said with a scoff. We agreed upon a point of contact. I believe this is intelligence worth at least 1,000 pounds. 1,000 pounds? Look up at the crimson moon. Are you dreaming? Squall scoffed. This might be a trap. Don't you understand that? Blazing might very well have found helpers, which is why he dares to seek us out. It's not for me to judge whether it's a trap or not. 500 pounds. Less than that, and I'd rather pretend that nothing has happened. Alger attempted to argue on the basis of reason for the reward. 300 pounds. You have to follow me somewhere and stay there for some time. It's to prevent you from selling this piece of news to others and spoiling our plans. We'll pay you when we capture Blazing with the intelligence you provided or have his spirit channeled. Don't worry. Food, alcohol, and a bed will all be free. Regardless, you lucked out. If there are any accidents that had resulted from you, hee. I believe you'll know the outcome, Squall suggested with a tone which didn't allow for refusal. Sure enough, just as I expected, with my background being unknown, and with me not being too dangerous, the possibility of them choosing temporary detention is much higher than silencing me. However, I've also made preparations for a worst-case scenario. As long as I'm not too careless, escaping isn't a problem. Alger deliberately acted like he was in a dilemma as he said, no more than 2 days, or my crew will leave with my ship. I'll inform them if it exceeds 2 days. At some point in time, a sharp scalpel had appeared in Squall's palm, and he was making it jump and spin like an acrobat. After Alger described in detail the point of contact at 15, Emiris Avenue and the corresponding communication methods, Squall didn't speak further. He turned around and led Alger as they turned at every corner, and they arrived at an unknown street before entering a nondescript house. Long time no see, blue-haired captain of a ghost ship. The door was opened by an old man with hair that had more white than black. He was dressed as a local and wore a pair of baggy pantaloons. "Old Quinn. You really are the intelligence officer of the Admiral of Blood," Alger deliberately said in astonishment. Old Quinn chuckled and said, "There's always some truth to rumors. What you imagine to be fake might very well be real." He didn't switch on the gas wall light, but he carried a silver candle lamp in his hand as he guided Alger and Squall through the dark hall into a spacious, windowless basement. "You'll stay here for a while. My friends and I will be in charge of watching you and also provide you with alcohol and food," Old Quinn said with a laugh. "To show our sincerity, we're not going to disarm you." "All right." Alger took the initiative to walk to the low bed in the basement. Old Quinn closed the heavy stone door and locked it behind him. Squall didn't linger on, but hurried away, checking repeatedly to see if he was being followed. After changing to a rental carriage, he came to a lone enclave in Byam. It was also the residential area of the upper class. As he entered a garden bungalow, Squall saw Mavedi sitting on a sofa in the living room, waiting for him. The others were either lying, standing, or sitting in a semicircle, with puppets and zombies acting as guards around them. Steel's lips were thick, his skin swarthy. His hair was curled up like steel balls often seen in factories. "Is the intel reliable?" The muscles on his arms trembled, exuding vibes of tremendous strength. However, his entire being emanated a cold and sinister feeling, as if he wasn't a living creature. Squall nodded. "He's a pirate captain who serves money. I've already detained him at Old Quinn's place. If there really is a problem, he definitely won't be able to leave that place alive. I think he knows this very well." At this point, Squall revealed a cold smile. "However, we still have to be wary of any accidents. This might be a trap set up by Grazing. Do you have any ideas?" Mavedi asked directly. The first thing he saw was a pirate lying on a couch. He was wearing a brown local tunic and twirling a yellowish-brown straw hat with his fingers. This was Mavedi's deputy of this round of operations. He was the captain of the 6th ship which was lost in the battle with Vice Admiral Dusk, Blood Brambles Hendry. He had a bounty of 3,800 pounds. It's clear that Squall has a plan. Hendry used his straw hat to cover his pale face. Squall chuckled and said, "Didn't that adventurer, John Smith, send Mordor to join us undercover? Let's deliberately leak the news to him, making him think that we're still waiting for help and that we can only take action the day after tomorrow or 3 days later. Those bunch of greedy adventurers definitely wouldn't let Blazing off. They'll definitely fall over themselves for him. When the time comes, we can find a spot to watch the show. If there are any accidents, they'll be the ones bearing the brunt of things. If everything is successful, we can also cull them." "All right." Steel Mavedi's eyeballs slightly moved, radiating intense bloodthirst. In the early hours of the morning, everything was ready. Blood Brambles Hendry brought a leather suitcase over, took out a peacock blue carpet, and slowly spread it out in front of him. There were many mysterious patterns on it that had a non-human flavor to it. Mavedi, Squall, and 2 other Beyonders, as well as 8 zombies and puppets, took their places on it. Hendry was the last to step in. Closing his eyes halfway, he recited a single word in Elvish, "Flight." The peacock blue carpet tightened suddenly and floated upwards, lifting everyone up from the ground and into the air as they flew towards Amiris Avenue. During this process, Hendry pulled out a black handkerchief and shook his wrist, turning it into the night sky which magically covered all their traces under the moonlight. In about 7 to 8 minutes, they arrived in the area around 20 Amiris Avenue. Diagonally across them was the targeted house. They didn't move forward. Instead, they let the flying carpet hover silently in front of the crown of a thick tree as they lay prone to observe the situation. Time passed, second by second, as Hendry studied the mystical item. There were no signs of a lack of spirituality. The night slowly passed, and the horizon was suffused with a faint red glow. The sun was about to rise, and the gang of pirates led by Steel Mavedi began their preparations to find another suitable spot for daytime surveillance. At this moment, a figure nimbly moved across the rooftops with his back bent, arriving above 15 Amiris Avenue. He wore a black cloak, his eyebrows yellow, and eyes dark blue. His facial features and contours were relatively soft. It was none other than Blazing Danitz. Danitz looked around cautiously for a moment, then climbed up the raised chimney, pushed his hand through it, and slid down. He's really here? Steel Mavady, Blood Brambles Hendry, Squall, and company felt their spirits lift at the same time. At this moment, several figures sprang up from the chimneys and periphery of Units 13, 14, and 17. They rushed over with fast and potent stances, either breaking the windows, kicking open the doors, or using the chimney to rush into Unit 15 from different positions. The Rorstad Archipelago was the lone kingdom's governing branch in the central areas of the Sonia Sea. Similarly, it was a key diocese of the Church of Storms. It had a high-ranking deacon, who was part of the Council of Cardinals, permanently stationed here. Of course, even a pirate at the level of admiral might not be able to stir such a powerful figure into action, much less when it dealt with a second mate and bosun. As a result, it was left to Deacon Cordoba Roy, who happily accepted the order and led 2 mandated Punisher teams to activate sealed artifacts 2-37 and 2-166. They lay in ambush at a distance from 15 Amiris Avenue in order to be absolutely safe. From Cordoba Roy's perspective, a team of mandated Punishers with 2 sealed artifacts was enough to deal with the group of pirates consisting of Steel and Blazing Danitz, but the latter's intention of keeping an eye of his pursuers' whereabouts caused him to worry. Instinctively, he felt that there was a problem, so he called for an additional team of mandated Punishers. Actually, just having 2-37 is sufficient. While they waited, Cordoba Roy suddenly sighed. In his opinion, this sealed artifact would be the nightmare of Steel, Blazing, and company. He closed his eyes and the corresponding information appeared in his mind. Number, 37. Name, Dream of Eternity. Danger grade, 2, dangerous. It has to be used with care and moderation. It can only be applied for operations that require 3 or more people, a deacon, or diocese bishop. Security classification, bishop, team captain, and above. Find authorized novels and web novel faster updates. Better experience, please click www.novelhall.com for visiting. Sealing method, place in boiling water. Description, it has the appearance of a heart. It's black in color, feels ice cold to the touch, and is filled with holes, often making a sound like a flute. This item originates from a primitive tribe in West Balam of the southern continent. They have spirit warlocks as their leaders and are nocturnal. A lone army company conquered the tribe, received the object they revered on the altar, and in the week that followed, there were cases of soldiers acting abnormally, going mad, committing suicide, and so on. Research shows that as long as one comes into contact with this item, they will enter a long dream. If not woken up by someone else, one will forever remain in that illusory world. On the surface, they would appear frustrated, fearful, and confused. One's mental and biological states will gradually change. The researchers who were awakened were still unable to tell the difference between reality and dreams for a long time, which led to a series of tragic events, including, but not limited to, expressing love to their superiors, kissing the mouth of a venomous snake, suffering from depression, undressing and running naked, and attempting to bathe in boiling water. If they weren't transferred to another city, the only possible outcomes would be madness and suicide. This item can be used, causing all creatures within the target's surroundings to fall into the same dream. The user can choose the target to a certain extent and excluded companions. The effective radius is a maximum of 50 meters. Beyond that would burden the user tremendously, dealing severe mental damage. The user will enter a state of being unable to distinguish reality from dreams after the matter, and will have to leave the city where 2-37 is located for any chance of recovery. Many examples, see appendix, show that even without contact, this item can affect the surrounding population greatly unless it's placed in boiling water. Appendix 1. It is similar to the effects of a nightmare from the Evernight pathway, but it's more prominent and uncontrollable. 2. Example 1. A keeper once forgot to add charcoal, causing the fire to go out and the temperature of the boiling water to drop. He soon had an abnormal reaction, and he was suspected to be dreaming of a beloved girl of his. He began to make a passionate confession to his glove, and tried to engage in relation beyond that of friendship with it. Example 2. As his thoughts churned, Cordoba Roy suddenly saw Blazing Danitz, the Golden Dream's fourth bosun, come to this point of contact to collect information. He gestured with his hand, signaling the mandated punishers to open the golden box engraved with numerous symbols and magic labels before taking out sealed artifact 2-37 which was soaked in boiling water. The golden box contained another sealed artifact, 2-166. It could maintain the original temperatures of the objects inside, and to a certain extent, it could change the weather, producing sun-holy water rain. Of course, it also had very negative effects, otherwise, the mandated punishers would have long used it to seal 2-37 instead of using it as a temporary trick. The most unacceptable negative effect was that no matter what object remained in prolonged contact with it, it would become infected with the characteristics of life, and it would also piously believe in the eternal blazing Sunday. Within the mandated punishers, a table had already appeared that sang praises of the eternal blazing sun every day, and there was a candle that wished to light itself every second to purify everything. In response, the irascible mandated punishers had turned the table into a pile of firewood, and they had lit it using the aforementioned candle. Seeing figures appear one by one and dashing towards 15, Amiris Avenue, Cordoba Roy didn't hesitate to press his right hand down, ordering the team member beside him to activate sealed artifact 2-37. An illusory fish scale immediately appeared on the surface of that member's palm, and he directly grabbed the sealed artifact that resembled a pitch-black heart, out of the boiling water. The melodious sound of a flute rang out, and dense darkness enveloped the house at 15, Amiris Avenue. The scene before adventurer John Smith remained the same. It was still the bare, unfurnished living room and the black-cloaked Blazing Danitz. He didn't appear like he was in a dream. They ran over with all their might, fired, and used their own abilities to successfully injure Blazing and capture the famous pirate who had a bounty of 3,000 pounds and was involved with the key to death. However, in the real world, they were sitting with their legs up, or swimming with their arms outstretched, or using their fingers as guns, with their mouths making shooting sounds. Move out. Cordoba Roy left his hiding place and rushed to the house at 15, Amiris Avenue. The other mandated Punisher team members were divided into two groups and began encircling the house from different positions. Before Cordoba arrived, the living room was already brightly lit, as if the sun was rising. Holy pure water dripped down like rain. It none other than sealed artifact 2-166 being put to use. At a distance away, the flying carpet floated silently in the darkness. As soon as Steel Mavady and the others saw the mandated punishers appear, they immediately understood that this was indeed a trap set by Blazing Danitz. This son of AB*TCH, he actually defected to the Church of Storms. Mavady growled as mania flashed in his eyes. Blood Brambles Hendry looked at Calm Squall and sincerely praised him. Fortunately, we weren't careless. In fact, I didn't expect a foolish donkey like Blazing Danitz to cooperate with the Church of Storms, Squall said calmly. Perhaps, the injured him was already captured by the mandated punishers, and he had no choice but to cooperate with them. Just as they were about to leave, they saw something protruding from the shadows outside the house at 15, Amiris Avenue. Something was sticking to the ground and quickly moving away. Blazing. Steel Mavady recalled the scenes of his failed ambush. Danitz. Hendry also recognized the man who had tried to escape with his magical powers. Squall was taken aback for a moment before coming to a realization. Either Blazing Danitz wishes to use this opportunity to escape the mandated Punisher's control, or he has other traps to use against us. However, for some reason, the mandated punishers were attracted, so he had no choice but to give up and flee. Regardless, this is an opportunity. Blood Brambles Hendry glanced at the mandated punishers who had stormed the house. As long as we seize this minute, we'll be able to kill and take away Blazing under the noses of the mandated punishers. Steel Mavadi's hopes were momentarily raised as his eyes revealed an abnormal look of mania. After Squall nodded, he said to the other two Beyonders, "Take my zombies and puppets and guard this position. Once the mandated punishers are here, use them to create chaos and take the opportunity to escape." "Yes, boss." The two Beyonder pirates jumped off the flying carpet at the same time with the zombies and puppets. The peacock blue carpet made a turn and shot ahead of Blazing. "Provide us support. Mainly be on guard against the surroundings." "I'm worried that Danitz has other helpers," Squall seized the moment and said to the blood brambles Hendry. A smile appeared on Hendry's pale face. "All right." Without saying anything else, Squall nodded at Steel Mavadi. Relying on his advantage from being high in the sky, Mavadi was able to distinguish the mostly normal shadows, determining the direction of the target. He suddenly jumped off the flying carpet and landed heavily on the ground like a giant boulder. White frost condensed under his feet as a layer of cold and transparent ice quickly spread to the side. The black shadow was immediately frozen in the corner. With a crack, Blazing Danitz struggled to break free, growing out of the shadows. On the flying carpet, Hendry showed their good teamwork by dropping what he had long held in his hand. They were green leaves, flowers, and brambles. The leaves, petals, and brambles wildly grew in size or joined together, ensnaring Blazing Danitz, making him immobile. Squall took the opportunity to jump off the flying carpet and thrust a sharp scalpel in his right palm towards Danitz's neck. Splat! He held onto the handle of the scalpel with his right hand and circled around to the back of the target. Danitz's head fell off and his body quickly shrank, turning into a thin, tattered paper figurine. At the same time, Steel Mavadi felt an indescribable sense of hunger bearing down on him. It was like a terrifying monster hidden in the darkness, quietly watching him. "No, it's not Blazing." Just as this thought flashed through his mind, an extremely compressed, incandescent fireball flew over from one of the rooftops, smashing towards his body. Steel Mavadi only made one movement, and that was to raise his arm in front of his body. Boom! The flames exploded and a shockwave radiated in all directions, blocking Squall's and Hendry's line of sight. However, they weren't flustered at all, as they had the utmost confidence in Steel. Sure enough, Mavadi only suffered from having his clothes torn and his skin covered in white marks. Apart from that, he hadn't suffered any injuries at all. But at that moment, he suddenly saw a figure walking out of the roiling flames in the sky. It was clearly a black cloak belonging to Blazing Danitz, but it had neatly combed black hair, dark, emotionless eyes, and a thin, cold face. The Danitz from before had always been faceless Klein, Gehrman Sparrow, who had always been prepared for the hunt. Just as he leaped out of the flames, the 2 points of light in the eyes of Klein, who wore golden gloves on his left hand, enlarged in size and changed from dark to bright, as if they were lightning that suddenly cut across the sky. After distracting Steel Mavadi and company's attention with paper figurine substitutes, he had activated Creeping Hunger and switched to the interrogator's soul. He planned on using the psychic piercing Beyonder power. "Ah!" Steel Mavadi suddenly cried out miserably. It was as if someone had stabbed a knife into his head, stirring his grayish-white brain. A feeling of pain came from the depths of his soul, instantly occupying his mind. At the same time, his Beyonder powers erupted from the irritation and turned into a hurricane that spread out in all directions. Suddenly, beautiful snowflakes began to fall from the sky. Layers of translucent ice began spreading outwards, and the trees on both sides of the road were covered with white edges. They withered quickly, revealing traces of decay. The lingering resentment of the remnant spirits was successively awakened. They sobbed, wailed, and shrieked, causing the nearby area to be dyed with a gray and repressed color. Klein naturally descended from the sky, his left glove shining like the sun. He opened his arms and leaned back as if embracing something. Just as his heels touched the cold ground, a pure, blazing, thick pillar of light descended from above. This holy radiance enveloped Steel Mavadi, illuminating his dark skin, firm muscles, and steel ball-like curly hair. Priest of light, light of holiness. Without a sound, Mavadi's expression became even more twisted, and his skin began to show signs of melting. At this moment, he was like a candle that had been thrown into a burning fireplace. Compared to the corrupted Bishop Millet, as a zombie, he was weaker towards such attacks. The damage he took was even more serious. The snowflakes stopped falling, and the ice on the ground quickly melted. The trees that had white edges revealed their brown colors. There was no doubt that the powerful beam of light had caught the attention of Blood Brambles Hendry and Squall. The former's expression changed as he reached into his secret pocket and pulled out materials casting magic. He planned to use his terrain advantage to save Steel Mavady. At this moment, a raven made purely out of flames suddenly appeared before his eyes. 1, 2, 3. Countless fire ravens filled Hendry's field of vision like crimson stars. They flew over from all directions, flapping their wings in a dense, scorching hot formation. Hendry's heart skipped a beat as his gaze seemed to freeze. He immediately moved his hand elsewhere to grab another type of material. Whoosh! He scattered light blue powder on his body while he chanted in ancient Hermes, sea waves. The powder suddenly expanded and turned into dark blue waves that spread out in all directions. When they met the fire ravens, they made sizzling sounds and created a large amount of white fog. The fire wave from the previous explosion had subsided a little. Through the remnants of the crimson light, Squall saw that Steel Mavady's skin was melting like wax and his flesh melted inch by inch. He saw the unfamiliar man in a black cloak standing next to him. He didn't panic. Like a cold-blooded viper who had lost its emotions, he calmly raised his arms and abruptly pressed both his palms down. In a split second, he saw the thin, grim-faced young man's body sink. His movements had turned slow, as though the wings he used for flying had been snapped. As for Steel Mavady, he began to struggle and roll in order to avoid a second round of light of holiness. Immediately following that, Squall noticed that the man had lost his weight and thickness. Once again, he turned into a thin paper figurine, pressed to the ground by an invisible force before soaking into the mud that came as a result of the melting ice. Klein phased into existence from another position. He rubbed his right thumb and middle finger together and snapped his fingers 3 times as he rushed forward. Pa! 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 The sunbird-shaped dark golden brooch in front of him flashed continuously as it added a purifying element to his air bullets. Bang! 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 The 3 bullets connected at an extremely fast speed and hit the slow-moving Steel Mavady in his right chest, penetrating his half-melted skin and flesh, creating an exaggerated, gruesome wound. Golden flame spread in all directions. So. Squall tossed out scalpels after scalpels, but they were all dodged by Klein's deft, acrobatic maneuvers. At that moment, Steel Mavady had gotten a breather. With a push of his palm, he stood up once again and charged straight at the enemy, fully displaying his advantage in close combat, as well as his abnormally strong body that could withstand powerful blows. Ice formed under his feet again, and his fists effused a rotting aura. Then, once again, he saw 2 bolts of lightning shoot out from Klein's dark brown eyes, shooting into his own. Steel Mavady subconsciously raised his head and clenched his teeth. His nose, mouth, and ears were all leaking blood, adding to his previously melted skin. While shooting the air bullets, Klein had changed the soul he used for grazing. It was still interrogator, and it was still psychic piercing. Against a beyonder like a zombie which had a body as tough as steel, dealing damage to the spirit body was far more effective. While the repeated strikes made Steel Mavady's body stiffen for short periods of time, he lost the shackles of his reasoning. Black, firm hair grew from his face, 1 strand at a time, while his teeth and nails also constantly grew longer. His skin squirmed in a bid to coalesce, turning from black to white. He was like a real, crazy zombie who was thirsting for blood. Klein took this opportunity to close in. He bent his body and brushed past Steel Mavady's shoulder. He then stuffed the item in his hand into the hideous wound that he had created into the man's body. It was a bottle with a few ordinary brass bullets, and inside it was a large amount of sun-holy water that Klein had prepared in advance. Oof. Klein, who didn't stop, caused Squall's attempt to control him to fail again. With a twist of his heel, he moved behind Steel Mavady, his back to him. Pow! He raised his right hand and snapped his fingers before Steel Mavady could pull out the glass bottle. Bang! A light explosion rang out, and fiery crimson light soared, shattering the already fragile glass bottle. Large amounts of sun-holy water inundated Steel Mavady's body. The infamous pirate with a bounty of 6,000 pounds froze where he stood, his throat letting out an anguished groan. He plopped to his knees, a dark green gas in his body was pouring out and disappearing into the air. At the sight of this, Squall's eyes darkened. He immediately took out an iron-black charm and muttered a word in ancient Hermes, shriek. The charm suddenly cracked and vanished, completing the sacrifice. An invisible sound wave swept outwards like a tsunami, almost successively drilling into the ears of everyone around. Klein's mind buzzed, the tip of his nose cold. Blood oozed out, and Blood Brambles Hendry on the flying carpet was in an even more miserable state. His face was twisted, and his body convulsed as he fell down, unable to even let out a tragic scream. On the contrary, Blazing Danitz, who was far away on a rooftop, wasn't subject to any effects. He happily threw out another blob of a highly compressed incandescent fireball. The fireball landed on Hendry's body without any resistance and exploded with a loud boom. Flesh and blood splattered outwards. Flames wrapped around his fingers, calves, and head before he fell to the ground. The flying carpet then lost control and slowly settled down. Squall took the opportunity to turn around and run, not hesitating in the slightest. However, he was stunned to discover that the terrifying man, who had almost finished off Steel Mavady within 10 seconds, didn't seem to show the slightest signs of being impeded. He had turned around and given chase. How is that possible? This a shriek charm created by Admiral. Squall had no time to think over the reasons. He ran as fast as he could down the other street. At that moment, his head was suddenly hit hard by someone. A tearing pain made his whole body spasm. Find authorized novels and web novel faster updates. Better experience, please click www.novelhall.com for visiting. The lightning in Klein's eyes faded as he raised his right hand and snapped his fingers once more. Bang! An air bullet crossed the distance of about 10 meters and accurately drilled into the back of Squall's head. Squall didn't have the non-human endurance that Steel had. His vision immediately blackened, and he slowly fell to the ground. Klein caught up with him in a few steps, reached out his left hand, and let the jubilant creeping hunger enjoy the meal. I have heard the voice of the true creator before, and I've experienced Mr. Door's call for help. I have great resistance in this aspect, and I can even quickly recover from the shrieking of a wraith, let alone a mere charm. Klein muttered silently to himself as he watched Squall's body be reduced to flesh and blood and plunge into the open mouth of creeping hunger. After a few seconds, creeping hunger came to a satisfied halt, and Klein quickly returned to Steel Mavady's side. This zombie had been miserably purged. Although his head remained intact, he was already dead. Klein took a few steps forward, picked up the peacock blue flying carpet that had fallen to the ground, wrapped it around Steel's body, and lifted it. Glancing back at 15 Amiris Avenue, he listened to the commotion of rampaging zombies and puppets, and he sensed that the mandated punishers were approaching. Klein pulled his hood over his head, bowed slightly in that direction as a salute. Pa! Klein rubbed his fingers, and all of the paper fragments around him were set ablaze, producing crimson-red columns of fire. Under the light of the fire, his body turned illusory, and he vanished from where he stood, with the items turning into a shadow. As for the beyonder characteristics of Squall and Hendry, which were slowly coming into existence, he didn't take a look, nor did he pay any attention to them. Greed would cause him to fall into unnecessary danger. Besides, the harvest he had reaped now was already sufficient. After leaving some of the mandated punishers to deal with the rampaging zombies and puppets, the pirates who had been damaged by his companions and the beyonder adventurers who were caught, Cordoba Roy led the rest of the team and rushed over. However, all they saw were scattered corpses, scalpels, and withered trees on the streets. They could distinguish the receding aura of the sun, as well as the evil sensation that came from the depths of flesh and blood. It was early in the morning, and the sky had just brightened up slightly. Most of the alleys were dark and quiet. With the aid of Danet's cloak, Klein blended into the shadows and quickly moved about. He felt as if his surroundings were grayish-black and transparent, with reality being blurred. All sounds seemed to come from the depths of the starry sky, empty and distant. After staying as far away from Amiris Avenue as possible, he acquired his bearings and grew out from the shadows. He appeared in an empty alley filled with broken stones. Klein's hands shook, throwing Steel Mavadi's peacock blue flying carpet out in front of him. He wanted to finish the grazing before Mavadi's spirit body began dissipating. Throwing away the flying carpet, he took a step forward, stretched out his left hand, and extended his 5 fingers, aiming from above at the corpse that was still warm. Creeping hunger revealed its original appearance, a thin material that looked like it was made up of human skin. 2 eyes had split open in the middle of its palm. Its pupils were bright red, as though they were dyed in blood. Whoosh! A bone-chilling breeze suddenly blew through the alley. It swirled around Steel Mavadi's corpse, twisting into an almost transparent human figure. One could vaguely see thick lips and curled hair that resembled steel beads. Mavadi's spirit body wore an abnormally pained expression as he tried his best to resist the suction of the creeping hunger. As for the grayish-white and blackish-green dots of light, they were like a surging galaxy, quickly flying out from his body and merging into the transparent figure. No. Mavadi let out a soundless scream, already being too late to beg for mercy. All he could do was desperately slip into the human-skinned glove, becoming attached to an empty finger, and revealing his beyonder characteristic that connected with the environment to a certain extent. This connection determined what powers would be usable when grazing Steel Mavadi's soul. Perhaps it would be 1, 2, but no more than 3 powers. Klein had no choice over the number and details before they became fixed, as it was purely random. Creeping hunger quickly blanketed its paleness and finally returned to its former disguised state, a plain black glove. Klein closed his eyes and sensed the changes for a few seconds before letting out a profound sigh. This time, his luck wasn't bad, but it wasn't too good either. He had succeeded in acquiring 3 beyonder powers belonging to Steel Mavadi, but he didn't receive the body as hard as steel, the tenacious vitality of being impervious to gunfire, flames, or a certain degree of explosives. The first is the power of a zombie, which allows me to unleash a critical attack, making up for my previous flaws of only having a nimble combat style. The second is mastery over ice. Although it's impossible to condense an ice spear or create a blizzard like that of the Demoness pathway to inflict a direct attack, I can freeze the surrounding ground, lower the temperature of the air, and effectively affect the movement of my enemy. If there's any physical contact, then I can even freeze the enemy's body or stiffen his flesh and blood. It's a perfect match for my combat ability. The third is the manipulation of zombies. Heh, I no longer need to be afraid of not being able to have partners for a round of cards. Klein thought for a moment, then he bent down to inspect the items on Steel Mavadi's person. He quickly found 26 pounds, 11 soldi, and 8 pence in cash, as well as a collection of strange things that seemed normal, such as candles, clips, a thorny whip, and so on. Considering the fact that Steel Mavadi was a member of the Rose School of Thought and belonged to the type of people who indulged in their desires, Klein vaguely understood what was going on. Spitting on the ground, he only took the cash. Werewolf has supernatural healing powers. Zombie has a body like steel. There's really no need for him to carry any healing-related medicine or items. It's as Danitz concluded, Mavadi doesn't have any mystical items. That's right, mystical items are few in number to begin with. Many have clear flaws and negative effects. Not everyone can have one even if they want one. Previously, in the group consisting of a wraith, zombie, and werewolf, there were only 2 mystical items, Scarlet Lunar Corona and Biological Poison Bottle. Klein nodded and took out a folded piece of paper. He unfolded the yellowed piece of paper and placed it on the body of Steel Mavadi, covering his face. It was a bounty notice with a portrait of Mavadi and the corresponding bounty reward, 6,000 pounds. Klein straightened up, took a step back, stepped on the peacock blue carpet, and pulled out a paper figurine. Pa! With a swing of his arm, his wrist shook, and the paper figurine was thrown out. It burst into flames before scattering into ashes. Soon after, he phased into a shadow and disappeared into the alley along with the items. 2 or 3 minutes later, Cordoba Roy rushed over with a portion of the mandated Punisher team, just in time to see a cool breeze blow up the bounty notice, revealing Steel Mavadi's dissolving flesh and blood dissolving, his eyes wide open. Whoosh. The bounty notice fell to the side and remained facing up. Having lost track of their target, Cordoba and the others silently brought Steel's corpse back to the area where the battle had taken place. Glancing at the team members who were inspecting the site, the deacon, Cordoba, restrained his emotions and asked in a deep voice, "A believer of the sun?" This was the most important question for him and his diocese. The mandated Punisher team member responsible for finding clues via supernatural means to recreate the truth wasn't a Beyonder of the Storm pathway, but a Sequence 7 knowledge keeper corresponding to Reader, also known as Detective. He didn't rush to answer, but instead came over and squatted down to examine Mavadi's corpse. After a while, he looked up and said, "It's not a believer of the sun, probably a result of using the powers of a mystical item." "Reason?" Cordoba asked with a frown. The mandated Punisher said, "There's an evil feeling within that stems from flesh and blood. One of the corpses was devoured in such a manner, leaving only a body's traits and items. If it's a sun believer, they wouldn't do something like that even if they relied on items. To them, things in the domain of the true creator are sacrilegious and require immediate purification or sealing. They likely wouldn't borrow its powers." After thinking for a few seconds, Cordoba agreed with this conclusion and asked, "Someone from the Aurora Order?" "No, a real Rose Bishop or Shepherd wouldn't act so crudely. They'll definitely wrap the corpse within their body and deal with the scene after departing. There's no reason to dismember the body on the spot. It's a waste of time that also leaves a bunch of items that can be considered valuable. To devour him in such a rush, it resembles that of the negative effects of a mystical item," the knowledge keeper said calmly. "A mystical item that possesses powers in both the sun and secret suppliant domains? Perhaps it's something with powers like that of a shepherd? Berg, what's your take?" As a deacon, Cordoba had the clearance to know of a shepherd and their special abilities. As for the knowledge keeper knowing, it was a result of his position in the team. The other mandated Punishers had no idea what they were talking about. Knowledge keeper Berg stood up. "It's all possible." "Any suspects?" Cordoba asked in a low voice. Berg shook his head. "There are no suspects for the time being. But one thing can be confirmed. Blood Brambles was killed by blazing Danets. The other person is his helper, a rather terrifying powerhouse that's not weaker than a pirate admiral." "A terrifying powerhouse?" Cordoba's expression turned grave as he muttered under his breath. Following that, his eyes lit up. "Could it be Edwina? She can simulate some Beyonder powers which she has seen before." Knowledge keeper Berg pondered for a moment and then said, "We can't rule out that possibility, but our intelligence shows that she was in the vicinity of Sonia Island a few days ago. Unless she can simulate a corresponding ability and use the spirit world to travel here." Cordoba paced back and forth, looked around, and said, "Deal with the scene, and don't bring this to the attention of the nearby residents. I'll submit the mission report, and let's hope that we'll receive more effective information." This involved a powerhouse whose combat prowess was equivalent at least to Sequence 5. He could only restrain his irascible mood and make the most rational decision. Inside Old Quinn's house, in the basement with the heavy stone door sealed shut, Alger was sitting on the low bed, quietly looking at the candles on the table when his vision blurred. He saw the gray fog emanate, along with the fool sitting on a high chair, overlooking everything. A blurry silhouette appeared below, hands clasped before his face as he said in a pious tone, "Honorable Mr. Fool, the matter has come to a successful conclusion." "The matter has come to a successful conclusion?" "This involves Steel Mavadi and several other Beyonders. The world sure is efficient at handling matters. His strength is stronger than I expected." "As expected of an adorer of Mr. Fool." "Heh, he might be able to sell another Beyonder characteristic at the Tarot Club, maybe even more than one. How did he get around the effects of sealed artifact 2-37? The uniqueness of a god's adorer? A thought flashed through Alger's mind, and he instinctively thanked Mr. Fool. Then, he took out a small metal bottle and smeared mint extract on the tip of his nose. A strong, irritating odor seeped into his head, instantly making Alger become abnormally clear-headed. At some point in time, a white gauze mask appeared in his hands, and he had poured the full moon essence oil onto it. After methodically putting on his mask, Alger stood up and walked slowly to the heavy stone door. With a staid series of movements, he retrieved a sealed metal jar from the inside of his clothes, twisted the mechanical switch, and pulled out a tube. Then, he stuffed the tube into the crevice of the stone door and extended it out. Without a sound, the gas inside the metal container started to emanate. This was the sanguine anesthetic gas provided by the moon, Emlyn. It can knock out strong commoners, sequence 9 beyonders with strong bodies, and even higher sequences who were lacking in their constitution. Even if Old Quinn can resist the gas, he would still be significantly affected. As for his helpers and friends, Alger leaned against the stone door and waited patiently. When nearly a third of the gas was dispersed from the jar, he pulled the tube back and closed the switch. He turned around and listened attentively before receiving a satisfactory answer. Alger revealed a faint smile. He rapidly converged his aura and compressed it inside him. Suddenly, the muscles on his body bulged, and he threw a punch forward. Raging blow. Bang! The iron lock of the heavy stone door directly shattered, and the door itself opened up. Alger withdrew his fist and walked out, leaving only the sleeping figures outside. Author's note: creeping hunger has two modes, grazing and devouring. The former targets the soul and beyonder characteristic, while the latter targets the flesh and blood. 48, Acid Lemon Street, outside the Wind of Azure Inn. Dressed in a thick jacket and pantaloons, Blazing Danitz returned by taking a detour. He clung to the corner of a wall, remaining motionless for a long time. He was hesitating on whether to take the opportunity to run away and not face the terrifying madman, Gehrman Sparrow, again. Unlike the battle at Bansi Harbor, he was hiding on a rooftop far away this time. It allowed him to take in the entire battle zone. Therefore, while supporting Gehrman Sparrow and battling Blood Brambles Hendry, he finally saw the combat process of the crazy adventurer, finally grasping his beyonder powers and traits. Paper figurine substitutes, phasing out from flames, psychic blasts, a holy beam from the sun domain, shooting out air bullets with his finger, the ability to disguise himself into another person, as well as a glove that changes its appearance several times, and devoured Squall. His powers far exceed my imagination, and there are a few that can't be compatible with each other. This isn't something that can be explained simply with the addition of one or two miraculous items to a sequence. Also, the sense of hunger that came from the depths of his soul explains something. That glove from the Vice Admiral Hurricane, creeping hunger. Captain had specifically reminded us that the glove can use the souls of many beyonders for grazing and thus use their powers. Danitz went through the thoughts he previously had and came to a final judgment. Gehrman Sparrow is the current owner of creeping hunger. He didn't feel any sense of belittlement simply because Gehrman had relied on a powerful mystical item to display such terrifying strength. Instead, he felt even more reverence for him. The reason for this was just one: a large part of using a mystical item to its fullest had to do with one's abilities. Without sufficient strength and extraordinary combat experience, even with creeping hunger, Gehrman Sparrow wouldn't have been able to finish off Steel Mavady and Calm Squall within 10 seconds. 2. His captain, Vice Admiral Edwina Edwards, learned from secret sources that Vice Admiral Hurricane didn't die at the hands of the Church of Storms, but instead, he was quickly killed by a particular powerhouse while fleeing. Danitz had no lack of understanding regarding the power of Vice Admiral Hurricane, Kalangos, back when he was at his peak. He knew that the standing of a powerhouse which could easily finish him off was equal to that of the top pirate powers. Furthermore, it would be two of the most powerful and terrifying ones, the King of the Five Seas and Queen Mystic. Although there's the factor of surprise, it would just lower the evaluation by a little. The person wouldn't be much weaker than the King of Immortality, and they'll be stronger than Admiral Hell and Admiral of Blood. Creeping hunger now belongs to Gehrman Sparrow. This means that he's either the one who killed Kalangos, or there's a power figure at the level of the Four Kings backing him up. No matter which possibility it is, it's all the more terrifying than I had originally expected. Danet's body tensed up. He really didn't want to face the adventurer who had crazy blood flowing in him. Phew. He heaved a sigh of relief. He felt that he had been hesitating here for too long and that he had to make a decision as soon as possible. Gehrman Sparrow knows how to divine, and he's rather confident in his abilities in this domain. With my shadow cloak in his hands, escaping won't only fail, but it would also end up infuriating him. Shadow cloak is a rare mystical item. Clenching his teeth, Danetz turned the corner and went through the door of the hotel, all the way to the luxurious suite. After a few seconds of careful waiting and observation, Danetz took out his key and opened the door. He saw that the room was dark, that the gas wall lights hadn't been lit, and that the not very bright light of the early morning was shining through the window and onto Gehrman Sparrow, who was facing the door. The adventurer had changed back into his usual tweed black overcoat with dark trousers. He held a half-top hat in his hand, and his right foot was raised over his left thigh. He leaned back a little, his face obscured since his back was to the window. Only his dark brown eyes, which were exceptionally clear, watched the door with indifference and calmness. Danetz unconsciously lowered his head, laughed dryly, and said, "In accordance with your instructions, I circled to a few news agencies and wrote the information that Blazing had killed Steel Mavady, Blood Brambles Hendry, and Squall on pieces of paper and threw them in. Of course, I mentioned having a powerful helper in this piece of news. He's a mysterious, unknown, a top adventurer, and a veteran bounty hunter." Klein nodded, revealing a polite smile. "Very good." With a sigh of relief, Danetz looked around and saw the peacock blue carpet. He was stunned for a few seconds before asking in puzzlement, "What about the heads of Steele and Hendry?" Klein replied calmly, "Wasn't taken." "You didn't take them?" Danetz exclaimed in astonishment. "Then what about our bounty?" As long as they had the heads of Steel and Blood Brambles, he would be able to get the appropriate bounty through people with connections. Although this would cost them 15 to 30% of the money received, he couldn't claim the bounty himself as a pirate. This was the only way, as the military's and the church's use of bounty rewards to encourage pirates to kill each other didn't mean that they would turn a blind eye to a gift that came walking through the door. To Danetz's surprise, Gehrman Sparrow, whose eyes were crazed with the desire for money, had actually not taken the heads of Steel and Blood Brambles, which meant that he had automatically given up on the bounty. Klein didn't answer him and pointed to the flying carpet on the ground. "You had helped in this. You have two choices. One is 3,000 pounds in cash, and the other is this flying carpet. You have 5 seconds to consider. Exceeding that time will be considered as forfeiting. 3,000 pounds in cash or the flying carpet? This flying carpet seems to only have the ability of suspension and flight. Furthermore, its speed isn't too fast, and it's not too useful. No, at sea, to a beyonder not from the sailor pathway, such items are very precious. At the very least, there's no need to worry about the aftermath of a ship being sunk." Danetz was momentarily thrown into a dilemma. Then he heard Gehrman Sparrow's voice counting. 3, 2. Danetz's heart skipped a beat, and he quickly said, "Flying carpet." Klein nodded and said, "Okay." With the knowledge that Gehrman had great credibility, Danetz finally relaxed before asking with a grumbling mumble, "Why didn't you count 5 and 4? Wasn't it supposed to be 5 seconds?" Klein replied without changing his expression, "Counted inwardly." "Counted inwardly." Danetz took a deep breath and grimaced. Klein slowly stood up, flicked his wrist, threw the hat from his hand, and left it hanging firmly on the rack before walking to his bedroom. Cathedral of Waves. Alger, who entered in the name of coming for morning prayers, met the diocese bishop, Chogo, and explained everything that had happened last night. The only thing that had been modified was that the sanguine anesthesia gas had been turned into a slumber charm of the Church of Evernight. Chogo nodded in approval. "To be able to go deep into the enemy's lair and bear the risk of death for the sake of your faith, such an act is worthy of praise. You are a true storm attendant. Last night, we captured 5 Beyonders and killed 2 of them on the spot. As a result of this, Mavady, Hendry, and Squall have also died. The heads of these 3 pirates will no longer appear, or they will be in our hands, so the government's bounty will be ours. The total receivable reward will exceed more than £10,000 in total, and you will receive the bulk of it, which is £6,000. Do not refuse. The Lord has told us that those who fight for their faith must not be reserved. Holy Lord of Storms. An excited Alger pounded his left chest with his fist. Although he and the world didn't agree on how to split the spoils of war, he believed that the 2 of them had come to a tacit understanding. For example, they were not to interfere with each other when hunting pirates. As the bounty needed to be laundered through the church, the 2 of them would split it equally. As for the bounty offered by countries and organizations such as Intis and Faisac, Alger didn't hold any expectations for them. This was because every time one exchanged for the bounty reward, one needed to hand over the corpse or head of the target. Therefore, only one entity could be chosen. Only those with a deep background and good relations with the various organizations and countries could receive all of them. £3,000 will belong to the world. If I were to lose £3,000 at once, it will raise suspicion. Yes, I'll have to find an opportunity to buy a mystical item. Such things are rare, so they're often overpriced, even more so when in times of great need. No one will doubt that I spent £5,000 on a purchase that's worth £3,000. If I sell the items obtained from Old Quinn, the ones he had received, the accounts would be squared. Alger quickly came up with a follow-up solution. Knowing that he had £3,000 waiting for him, Klein sat happily in the high-back chair of the fool and considered a serious question. That is, after grazing Steel Mavady, he had to release a soul from creeping hunger as he promised. Their Beyonder powers are quite useful. It's quite a pity to release them before finding a replacement. Yes. Besides, I've already released that faceless. There doesn't seem to be a need to do it this time. Feelings of hesitation and reluctance to part had stirred in Klein's heart as he was thrown into a dilemma. He was unable to make a decision. After a long time, he leaned back and exhaled. I can't deceive myself. He shook his head and laughed, turning relaxed from making up his mind. He decided to keep his promise and release a soul. The faceless from before had been released early because he wanted to receive some corresponding information. It was already an equal exchange. Which one should I release? Miss Justice bought the materials for a psychiatrist potion and a mystical item worth 5,500. Even if she's rich, her financial situation should be tight, so it wouldn't be appropriate to sell the psychiatrist characteristic at this time. Yes, she still owes my adorer £2,000 and will repay the money in February or March. Klein rejected the idea and decided to release the nightmare. As a former Nighthawk, he always had an inclination and felt gratitude based on his impression and feelings towards Beyonders in this domain, therefore, it wasn't difficult to make a choice in these situations without having any other factors to consider. Calming himself down, Klein picked up the human-skinned glove that he had previously brought above the grey fog. He closed his eyes and began to sense the distorted souls. Without any hesitation, he released the nightmare. The nightmare appeared by the side of the long bronze table. He was a man in his 30s with black hair and blue eyes, a long, thin face, and obvious nasolabial folds. He had a beard that wasn't too thick by his mouth and chin. As the pain and the distortion eased, he pressed his hand to his chest and gave a solemn bow. Compared to the faceless from before, the nightmare was obviously not as muddle-headed and weak after being released. It was unknown if the Evernight pathway's enhancement to one's soul was stronger than that of the Seer pathway, or if it was because the grazing process had only happened recently. Klein sighed silently and began asking via spirit channeling, "Why did you die at the hands of Kalangos?" The corner of the nightmare's mouth slightly curled up, revealing a bitter smile. "I'm a red glove from the Nighthawks. I was tracking down a bunch of ancient chronicles that originated from a Balam imperial tomb. We suspected that they were related to the reason for Death's passing. I found out that a part of it might have fallen into the hands of a particular tycoon, so I led 2 companions of mine and boarded the ship he was on. Unfortunately, we were attacked by Kalangos's fleet just as we were about to launch an investigation. What happened to your companions? Klein subconsciously asked. The nightmare said in a slightly pained tone, we originally had the opportunity to leave and even kill Kalangos through our skillful teamwork, but our ship sank, and we had to board a lifeboat instead. Everyone died. No, they were killed in the line of duty. May the goddess bless you. Klein drew a crimson moon inwardly. This made him more aware of the great difference between fighting at sea and fighting on land. Environmental factors were of critical importance. Beyond Earth, not from the sailor pathway, would be at a great disadvantage. If it wasn't because of the fact that the flying carpet had been huge, cumbersome, and slow, making him an easy target, Klein would have opted to keep it and give Dan its cash. Fortunately, I have the bladder of a murloc. I can find an artisan to create a mystical item that allows me to swim underwater. Unfortunately, it's very difficult to find an artisan. Most of them are from the Church of the God of Steam and Machinery, and there aren't many unaffiliated ones, otherwise, mystical items wouldn't be this rare. If push comes to shove, I'll get Mr. Hanged Man to help. Klein looked at the nightmare who had been killed in the line of duty and said softly as he leaned back, "What's your name? What unfulfilled wishes do you have?" The figure of the nightmare was already slowly dissipating. When he heard Klein's question, he said with a smile, "My name is Davy Raymond. I lost my parents, wife, and siblings in a black magic incident, leaving me with only one daughter, Nilu. She was born in 1330 and is a very lovely girl. And I'm sorry to say that in order to investigate the truth over the black magic incident, I joined the Nighthawks and later became a Red Glove. I didn't manage to spend time with her, making her lose her father alongside her mother. Haha, I believe that the church will definitely give her my pension and secretly provide her a certain amount of help. I'm not worried about her life, but I only hope to see her enter the hall of marriage under the witness of the goddess, to have her own family and not be lonely anymore. It's already the year 1350. She may already have a marriage partner," Klein sighed wistfully and said. "Time flies." Davy Raymond muttered in response. "Tell her that all the culprits have been punished and that I died because of an accident. There's no need to hate anyone anymore. Tell her that Daddy loves her, and Daddy is very sorry." His figure became more and more transparent, and he was about to disappear. Klein closed his eyes and asked, "Where does she live? What's the name of the tycoon who collected Death's Chronicles?" "We live in Desi County's Conant City. It's a beautiful seaside city, with rich rubber plantations growing nearby. If she hasn't moved, then she'll be living at 67 Red Indus Street. The tycoon's name is Jimmy Necker. He should have fallen into the hands of Kalangos as well." Before Davy Raymond finished speaking, his figure had already completely disappeared, leaving only a deep black gem-like object on the surface of his glove. Klein quietly watched this scene, and after a few seconds, he raised his right hand and tapped 4 times clockwise on his chest. He then said in a deep voice, "If there's a chance, I will visit your daughter and see how she's doing." In the palace, which looked like a giant's residence, the fog was endless, without any undulations, and was eternally unchanging. Klein put away Davy Raymond's beyonder characteristic, rubbed his forehead, and turned his attention back to Death's Chronicles. The Death pathway and the Evernight pathway can be switched at high sequences. There's nothing odd about the church sending personnel to investigate the corresponding chronicles. I wonder if Jimmy Necker is dead or not. I'll need to find out. If he has already perished in a tragic case, and the thing has fallen in Kalangos's hands, that will require me to investigate from the pirates' side. Kalangos's crew now belongs to Vice Admiral Ailment, Tracy. As it involves death, it might be able to help Mr. Azek. Klein decided to check it out in passing himself, and if he encountered any difficulties, he could write directly to the powerhouse. After clearing his mind, he quickly returned to the real world and used the ritual to summon Creeping Hunger back. After everything was done and seeing that it was already getting late, he gave up on the idea of trying to catch up on his sleep. He decided to summarize the experiences and lessons from last night's operation. The biggest lesson for Klein was that he had overestimated the patience of the mandated punishers. He had originally hoped that, even if there had been an accident in the beginning, the mandated punishers would have been able to restrain him and wait for the real target, the real protagonist, Steel Mavady, to appear. When that happened, they would have definitely used the sealed artifact which can pull many people into a dream, restraining all the unaffiliated Beyonders who had involved themselves in the Blitz. As for me, due to my uniqueness, I would be able to detect that I'm asleep and be able to forcibly escape. Then, I could have dealt with Steel Mavady and his helpers in a composed manner, completing an achievement of an instant kill, and also bring 2 corpses along with me. Yet, just as the incident happened, that bunch of irascible bros stormed in. They didn't even leave any backup teams to watch out for any contingencies. At the very most, they would let the wielder of the sealed artifact stay beyond the periphery, with 1 or 2 guards. The more Klein thought, the more he was at a loss on whether to laugh or cry. If it wasn't because Steel mandated Punisher's group of pirates who were more cautious and had at least 2 Beyonders assigned, as well as all their puppets and zombies to stop the mandated Punishers that might have pursued them, Klein would likely have found himself in a situation of going 2 against 5. If that had happened, he would have chosen to give up and directly engage in a strategic shift. What made Klein most satisfied was that he had done a pretty good job of making specific preparations. This was the professional habit of a magician. Because he had long known from Miss Sharon and Marie about the traits of the first 5 sequences of the mutant pathway, Klein was well aware that Steel Mavady, who had gone through the lunatic phase, could use irrational factors to resist any Beyonder disruption and influence on his mind. He had very strong resistance in this aspect, therefore, he gave up the thought of using Psychiatrist's Dragon Might and Frenzy, as well as Nightmare, which was clearly weaker than the mandated Punisher's sealed artifact, and he instead focused on the Interrogator's Psychic Piercing and the Priest of Light's Purification powers. Psychic Piercing wasn't a Beyonder power that disrupted one's thoughts and affected one's soul, but a means to directly attack the spirit body. In essence, the other effect acted on one's body of heart and mind, and targeted the soul body. There was a clear difference between the two. If any part of that combo failed to chain in any way, Steel Mavady would have been able to recover, making it impossible for me to kill him quickly. And in that environment, that would spell failure. Yes. I've also used the pathway's trait of losing themselves to their desires, making it easy to grasp their emotions. I believed that once they suffered a psychic attack, there would be a high chance of them counterattacking in madness, without any consideration of anything else. In fact, the safest way of dealing with a zombie is to set up matchsticks or have Danets. I'll use Flaming Jump and Light of Holiness, kiting Mavady. It'll make him want to battle but be completely unable to reach his opponent. He wouldn't escape even if he wanted to. Just send a fireball, and I'll catch up to him. Unfortunately, it's a waste of time, and the situation didn't allow for it. Klein sighed, took out his pocket watch, snapped it open, and checked the time. Seeing that it was almost 9 o'clock in the morning, he turned the handle of the door and walked out of the bedroom. At this moment, Danets was lying in a reclining chair, producing snores that sounded like a steam engine was operating in the room. He was quite alert, opening his eyes and sitting up as soon as Klein came out. "Are you going out?" Danets asked when he saw Gehrman Sparrow take off his hat from the coat rack. "Yes." Klein maintained his persona and didn't explain that he was attempting to act by helping someone confess. "What about me?" "Steel Mavady and his men are almost all dead, so I don't have to worry about that anymore. Even if the newspaper doesn't publish the news, I can spread it myself. There were idle pirates and adventurers who will use it as a material for bragging, spreading the matter to the sea and would end up informing Captain. That bunch of dogs hit can't do a thing aside from drink and brag, but even so, they still have their uses." Danets thought for a moment, then he asked while secretly feeling a sense of fear, "Mr. Sparrow, can LL leave now?" Klein revealed a faint smile. "You have always been free." "That's right. I wasn't caught by him this time, I was just looking for help. I have always been free." Danitz was stunned for a moment, then he was delighted. But right at that moment, he heard Gehrman Sparrow's voice lightly fleeting towards him. But that ends now. Ah? What? Danitz looked confused. It took him no less than 3 seconds to understand what Gehrman Sparrow meant. He had been captured again. Why? Danitz asked angrily and aggrieved. Klein put on his hat and said in a low voice, I want to meet your captain. Danitz widened his eyes, stood up abruptly, and shouted out, What do you want? This fellow is a little too agitated. Klein replied calmly, I have some things to ask her. He has some things to ask, Captain? Danitz frowned as he watched Gehrman Sparrow leave the room, unsure what his real motive was. What is this fellow really after? Money, riches? But he had the time to take away the heads of Steel Mavady and Blood Brambles Hendry to exchange for nearly £10,000 in bounty rewards. Yes, even after paying any commissions, it would still be £7,000 to £8,000. Yet, he didn't do so. Moreover, he generously shared the spoils of war with me. This is very contradictory. When he first heard that I was blazing, his first reaction was to call me a £3,000 bounty. In Captain's words, this isn't scientific. Why would he deliberately give up the bounty? Unless he has a better way to claim it safely, or he had specially left it for someone? Yes. He had been prepared for the appearance of the mandated punishers. He has his own connections and information channels. This way, everything can be explained. There's also the possible existence of the demigod that killed Kalangos. There's a powerful and secretive organization behind Gehrman Sparrow. Shocked by his own conjecture, Danitz instinctively tried to use his body language to express his feelings, but he forgot that his left arm was still fractured. He immediately grimaced in pain. This made him feel even more terrified. He didn't want his captain to meet such a dangerous and crazy fellow. He even suspected that Gehrman Sparrow's real motive was his captain's £26,000 bounty. In a duel, that lunatic might not necessarily win against Captain, and there's still the first mate, second mate, third mate, and a few bosuns. But he has a terrifying organization backing him. You want to hurt Captain? Over my dead body. Danitz puffed out his chest, raised his neck, and was filled with a stirring sense of self-sacrifice. He ran a hand through his hair, gave a long grunt, and said to himself, I'll make further observations. Perhaps Gehrman Sparrow really only has questions that he wants answered. Subconsciously, he looked around and found both the flying carpet and the shadow cloak. They weren't missing. In other words, Gehrman Sparrow left the things that belong to me behind. Isn't he afraid that I'll take the opportunity to escape? Or did he steal my hair that makes it easy for divination? No, he's a crazy guy. Even if he wishes to use my hair, he would just walk over and extend his hand to pull one out. It's impossible for him to do it secretly. Right, there's a powerful and secretive organization behind him. Perhaps, at this moment, there are people from that organization secretly monitoring me. They're waiting for me to leave, waiting for me to seek out Captain. How insidious. Gehrman Sparrow must have gone out on purpose. Danitz felt that he had grasped the truth of the matter thanks to his experience and wisdom. He paced back and forth before sitting back in the reclining chair. He then thought with a silent, mocking smile. I'm not leaving. I want to see what you can do. I will not bring danger to Captain. 3:15 in the afternoon, Simime Island. This island was also a part of the Rorstad archipelago, but it was the furthest from the City of Generosity, Byam. It took nearly 5 hours on a liner to reach it. On the way, Klein bought a suit with local characteristics and a small suitcase to replace the clothes he changed out of, for a total of 14 soli. They weren't even worth £1. It's really cheap. It's just change compared to a complete suit. Wearing pantaloons, a thick brown jacket, and a light brown cap, Klein disembarked from the liner with a native face that didn't stand out, and he entered some of the old ports on Simime Island. He had spent time buying clothes and changing his appearance, causing him to miss the 9 o'clock ferry and be put in a situation where he could only take the ferry at 10. Thinking of the expenses he had to pay for this acting, he couldn't help but calculate his current financial situation. The faceless characteristic was sold for £3,825. The pirate bounties net me £3,000. Although I haven't received the £6,825, I can basically include it into my budget as long as Mr. Hanged Man doesn't get exposed. The leftover cash from Donna and Company's gratuity add up to £255 in bits and pieces. I found £26, 11 solely, and 8 pence from Steel Mavady's body. Yes, there's still the 5 gold coins as reserves. I haven't spent much money recently, only spending slightly more than £1 in total. This is something to be happy about. With that, I'll have £7,110. Moreover, I still have the Nightmare Beyonder characteristic and the Murloc's bladder. They're still worth something. On second thought, I earned a £3,000 bounty with a Zombie Beyonder characteristic. The latter is worth about £3,000 to £5,000. That is to say I earned about £7,000. This is only from Steel Mavady, Blood Brambles Hendry, and Squall. Besides, there was quite a lot of waste. Indeed, hunting pirates is quite a good job. It can administer justice, punish the evil, protect the weak and innocent, and also make me rich overnight. Klein subconsciously turned his head to the side, only to see that the color of the seawater was much clearer than that of Byam's. It was as if the seawater was a huge, green, sparkling gem, reflecting golden rays under the sunlight. Sure enough, it's not without reason that generations after generations of adventurers have gone out to sea to search for wealth. Even if I deduct the remnant spirituality of ancient wraiths, eyes from a 6-winged gargoyle, spring water from Sonia Island's golden spring, and other supplementary ingredients of a Nimblewright master, the money I have left will be enough to allow me to buy a decent manor here, in Desi Bay, in the southern continent's colonies, and in the non-metropolitan areas. Lone's countryside is said to be very beautiful, and if it turns out that I'm really unable to return, I can consider settling down in a similar place. Yes, I still have a 10% stake in the Backland Bike Company, and my future returns won't be low. With confidence, Klein straightened his back and thought about the future. After letting his thoughts wander, Klein began to think about the more realistic question, which was whether he should sell the Nightmare Beyonder characteristic, find an opportunity to return it to the Church of Evernight, or create a mystical item with it through an artisan. It depends on the situation. The ideal solution would be to sell it to the church. The martyr, Klein, who had taken 2 potions from the Nighthawks, thought with uncertainty. At the same time, he hoped that Little Sun would soon reach Sequence 7 and be qualified to gain clearance to the methods used to remove the mental corruption from a Beyonder characteristic. As for the matter of releasing the Priest of Light from the glove, he wasn't in a hurry. Little Sun had just received the potion formula for Sequence 7, so he had no need for it at the moment. He would have to wait for a long time, and the powers of a Priest of Light was very effective in dealing with a pirate like Admiral of Blood in a way that was far more potent than the Sun Brooch. As his thoughts slowly settled down, Klein entered the small port town. The place was basically filled with natives. Their skin was nearly bronze, and their black hair had slight, natural curls. Their bodies emitted a scent that was derived from prolonged contact with spices. After changing his appearance and asking about Rain's situation and if there was any news of Went's death, Klein found a secluded corner. He wiped his face with his hand, turning his face into a tall, thin Went with rather distinct facial features. He carried his suitcase and circled around the town to its border. It was then that he saw the winery run by Rain's family. The girl with flaxen-colored hair could no longer be called a young girl. She had obviously matured a lot compared to what Went remembered. She was sweeping the entrance, and there was no one around. Phew. Klein took a deep breath and slowly let it out, feeling as though he was placed in a very difficult position. As a powerful keyboard warrior, he knew about theories like method acting and experimental acting, but he lacked further understanding. He could only try to guess at Went's mood and performance in this kind of scenario. Finally, he closed his eyes and walked over. Rain looked up when she heard footsteps, finally identifying the visitor. She opened her mouth slightly and let out a half-surprised exclamation before saying with a straight face, "Why are you suddenly back? Remember, you're just acting." Klein revealed a smile. "I came to bid you farewell." He spoke in a local dialect, with a somewhat nondescript Biam accent. The language of the Rorstad archipelago was also derived from ancient Fasak and belonged to another variant. As a half-historian, Klein was able to master it easily, and it only took him a short time to master it. "Farewell?" Rain asked, slightly surprised. Klein turned his head, looked to the side, and smiled. "I'm going to chase after a treasure trove, and I don't know when I'll be able to come back. When the time comes, I'll appear with a great deal of money. I'll buy a manor in the suburbs, plant some rubber trees, set up a vineyard, have my own mill, wine cellar, blacksmith shop, and let the air be filled with the scent of all kinds of spices. Then, I'll buy a few slaves and hire some servants, just like those masters. Heh, but I'll still be short of one thing." He overcame his goosebumps that were about to form on his skin, and he turned to look Rain in the eye. "I still lack a wife and a mistress for the manor. Rain, I like you. I wish to marry you. The reason I said it out loud today isn't to get an answer, but because I'm afraid that I would never have the chance to tell you again." After listening quietly, Rain suddenly scolded angrily, "You're a coward." "Ah. This reaction isn't right." Klein deliberately revealed a surprised expression. Rain suppressed her voice and said, 3 freaking years ago, I was already prepared to head to Biam with you. Yet, you didn't say anything in the end. You coward. You chicken. What's the use of telling me now? You're going to see soon, and you may never come back." The more she spoke, the more agitated she became. "You've said it out loud and become happy. You have no regrets, but what about me? I'll have to constantly think about you returning and live on in pain? You selfish bastard." She waved the broom in her hand and swung it towards Went. Klein knew that the real Went would have hit the broom away, hugged the girl, and tell her that he wasn't going out to sea again, but he couldn't do the same. He had to pretend to be chased away pathetically, running all the way to a nearby alley. There, he hit his head against the wall while silently cursing himself. It was 2F*** King Awkward. This is 2F** King Awkward. Rain went back to the door, picked up a broom, and crouched down. Her face was ashen, it was unknown what she was thinking about vaguely, she heard a sound, and she fell asleep. After using the charm, Klein turned around and nudged Rain, who was sitting on the ground while leaning against the wall, then he quickly left the area, hiding in the distance to peep at the results. Rain quickly woke up and realized that she had fallen asleep without knowing it. Everything that had happened just now appeared like a dream. She remained sitting there, motionless for quite a while. Suddenly, she lowered her head and let out a sharp curse that seemed to come from the depths of her throat. "Went, you selfish bastard." Sigh. Klein, who felt a tiny sensation of digesting his potion, sighed, changed his appearance, and left the place. He would have to spend the night on Simim Island, as there were no liners headed for Biam until the morning. After changing his face and turning into one of the two main streets, Klein went straight to the green mailbox and took out a letter he had prepared long ago from his pocket. This was a death notice he had forged as an imitation of an official police document. It was sent to the sergeant of the town of Simim Harbor. It was about the sudden death of the local resident, Went, in Biam. When deciding to do the acting, Klein had worked out a plan to keep things on track and not cause irreparable damage to the girl, Rain. His plan was to use the slumber charm to camouflage the real acting as a dream. This way, if Rain had no love for Went, he expected her to directly reject his confession. After hearing about the other party's death, she wouldn't feel any guilt, and at most some fear. In response to this, she could effectively be placated by going to church to pray and confess. If Rain also liked Went and responded to the confession, then the dream would give Klein a chance to extricate himself from the situation. The notification of Went's death would kill Rain's expectations, and it wouldn't have too negative an impact on her future life. But even so, it's still a bit cruel. No matter what kind of woman she is, facing the situation of a guy confessing to her in her dreams after his death is definitely going to be heartbreaking. She wouldn't be able to recover for a long time. Well, if I didn't do anything, and when the news of Wen's death reaches her, Rain would definitely feel very sad even if it might not be that serious. However, that knot in her heart would never be able to be mended, and she would be stuck wondering for the rest of her life whether Went had gone out on an adventure to pursue his and her future, or if he simply didn't like her. It's not a bad way to end things like this. Once she has overcome her pain, she will carry that gentleness of having been truly loved once while leading her future life. Sigh. Regardless, to forcibly interfere in the lives of others for acting, having an impact on an innocent person's life to a certain degree, even though I'm using the excuse of fulfilling a wish, it's not a truly kind thing to do. Just like Roselle said, the further one proceeds in the Beyonder pathway, the more twisted and evil it feels. The acting method might not be a catalyst. All I can do is try my best to minimize such effects. After sending the letter, Klein exhaled, and with a native face that didn't stand out, he walked to the only inn in town. Along the way, he summed up his previous experience, which was that disguising yourself as someone else and obtaining feedback was likely a main clause of the faceless principles. Second only to you can disguise yourself into anyone, but you are ultimately yourself. If it were any other faceless, they would have blocked out information about Went's death for the sake of this role. They would have agreed to Rain's confession and spent 1 to 2 years in a relationship with her, marry her, and have children with her, and then, to not be bound by the various relationships in this identity, remember who they were and leave coldly. If there was no exposure during this process, the potion would mostly be digested. But I really can't do it. It's just completely against my conscience. I can only try to push the envelope. Klein sighed, inexplicably afraid. He shook his head and thought in a silent self-deprecating manner, Beyonders not only have to constantly fight against threats and madness, but also fight against all kinds of evil thoughts, as well as the corruption that pulls one down and can cause one to fall if they aren't careful. Even so, at the end of the day, one might still be corrupted by the abyss, becoming a monster that one swears to get rid of. Sigh. Suppressing his thoughts, Klein stepped into the inn and said to the boss behind the counter, "An ordinary room." The thin boss looked up and gave a glance, saying, "A valid ID certificate." "How can a face I just came up with have one?" Klein smiled in embarrassment. "I forgot to bring it." "Then you cannot stay here. This is the rule of our town." The boss once again lowered his head and calculated his income and expenditure for the day. Klein took out a solely note and pushed it over as if nothing had happened. The boss's eyes suddenly widened. No, put it away. I don't want to be locked up by the sergeant." Get out, you dirty bastard with no proof of identity." Klein was thrown out of the inn in shock, unable to believe that the omnipotent entity known as money had just lost its power. After a few seconds of silence, he turned into an empty alleyway, turning back into Gehrman Sparrow with stark facial features. Klein returned to the inn, tapped on the counter, and said Loanese in a Backland accent, "A room." The boss looked up and immediately put down the things in his hand. He then stood up and nodded with a smile. Okay. Do you need a room with a view of the sea, or something quieter?" He switched to a clumsy Loanese that had a thick accent that resembled that of the land of spices, with no further mention of identification. "This really is a pragmatic world." Klein silently lampooned and politely responded, "Quiet." Yes, immediately, the boss responded hurriedly. Then he called an attendant, took the keys, and led Klein personally to the second floor. "Sir, how many days will you be staying?" "It's one solely 5 pence a night." Just tonight, Klein couldn't stand the enthusiasm, so he answered succinctly. At the Wind of Azure Inn, his luxurious suite with Danets was 5 solely a night. Without a doubt, the room the boss had chosen was clean and tidy, and there was no trace of the usual humidity in a harbor inn. Klein looked around and nodded in satisfaction. "Excellent." "It's my honor," the boss flattered with obvious fear. Klein put down his luggage, rested for a while, then he got up and went back down to the ground floor to settle his dinner. Beside the counter, tables were arranged messily on the first floor. There was a greasy layer on their surface, and a fireplace was burning in the corner, giving off light and heat. The Rörsted archipelago was slightly to the south, and the lowest temperatures in winter was only about 10 degrees Celsius. However, for the locals, this was still cold enough that they needed a fire to warm them up. Klein randomly found a seat and sat down, ordering a local specialty of grilled meat and spiced mushroom soup, with the main dish being potato bread. While he was waiting, he swept his gaze over the customers inside the restaurant. His gaze then instinctively landed on a lady. This lady had a head of simple tied-up black hair and a pair of distinctive greenish-gray eyes. Her appearance was the type that one would never get sick of easily, and the more he looked at her, the more intrigued he became. She was obviously not a native, but she was wearing a man's shirt and a thick tan jacket. By her hand was a round-brimmed hat with a depression in the middle. This was one of the more common adventurer outfits out in the sea. At her table, the three other men were the same, and they clearly appeared to have been exposed to the elements. Klein had never hid his appreciation of beautiful ladies, but his attention wasn't drawn to her by her appearance. The sea had a strong sense of discrimination against females. Women who could achieve a certain status among adventurers and pirates were either very scheming, very powerful, or both. They were people that one needed to be cautious and wary about. Their boots have some fresh mud on them. Did they just come back from the forest? Heh, they really are adventurers. Klein made a preliminary judgment based on some clues. If these four adventurers came by ferry from Byam, even if they had previously stepped on sewage or mud, the traces would have already dried up. Furthermore, as the town hadn't rained in the past 2 days, overall, the roads were quite clean with only some dust eliminating the two possibilities. It could only be explained that they had returned from a trip to the woods on the outskirts of the town. Klein had heard that many adventurers went deep into the primitive forests of the colonial islands in search of abandoned, forgotten pagan temples or altars, which often contained gold and jewels of ancient worship, but were later buried for various reasons in a place that no one knew of. In the bars of the islands, there was no shortage of legends that someone had managed to make a fortune overnight on an adventure into the woods. There might be evil spirits lingering in those places. It would be better to hunt pirates, or for one to at least acquire the relevant information in advance. Klein retracted his eyes and concentrated on waiting for the food. The 7 churches classified the various gods believed by the colony's primitive faiths as evil spirits, but Klein believed that some of them were natural spirits. After a while, the specialty grilled meat was served. It had been sliced into many smaller pieces and strung onto a wooden stick. The surface was smeared with a reddish-brown sauce. The fragrance was rich and the color was alluring. It looks a little like the kebabs from my previous life. In Lone, they're usually roasted as huge chunks of meat. Only after the meat is roasted would the chef slice up the meat. The method used here makes the flavors infuse the meat better. Klein picked up the wooden stick and bit down on a piece of meat. He felt the meat's juice slightly overflow, and there was a hint of sweetness in the salty fragrance. It's my type. He nodded in satisfaction. Klein enjoyed the meal and even tasted the local gurney sap, a special beverage, like lemonade with sugar and milk. He went back to his room. Because he had been hunting the night before, he hadn't slept at all. He washed up early, put out the fireplace, and got into bed. Sleeping too early meant one problem: he would wake up in the middle of the night to pee. Klein's dream was interrupted. He opened his eyes and slowly accumulated the courage to lift his quilt. In the middle of the night, Simene was about 8 to 9 degrees Celsius, and it was enough to make it feel sufficiently cold. After lying still for a while, Klein stretched out his arm and silently withdrew it. He contemplated for a few seconds before reaching out his hand again and picking up the sun brooch from his bedside table. Although it only provided the feeling of a hot summer on a spiritual level, and it didn't produce any actual heat, it could at least deceive himself into thinking that it wasn't cold. Klein got out of bed and headed for the washroom. He narrowed his eyes to ease the pressure on his lower abdomen. When he was done, he pulled up his pants and was about to wash his hands when his spiritual perception was triggered. Klein frowned slightly and looked up at the vent in the bathroom. Suddenly, something black and slippery dropped and hung there. It was a venomous snake extending its forked tongue. Klein was startled. He opened his mouth and shouted, "Bang!" The snake was miserably hit, and it split in half. What happened? Klein stared at it for a few seconds. Seeing no further movement, he walked out of the bathroom and pulled a gold coin from his pocket. "There is danger in the inn." Klein softly chanted the divination statement, entered cogitation, and then flipped a gold coin. Clang! A faint but crisp sound echoed in the quiet room. The gold coin tumbled and fell, landing in Klein's palm. It was tails, indicating a negative response. No danger. With a frown, Klein looked around and pulled out a bottle of insect-repelling essential oil from his coat on the coat rack. He sprinkled a circle around him, then he quickly took 4 steps counterclockwise, entering the gray fog to make a divination for confirmation. In about 10 seconds, he received a revelation: there was still no danger. Returning to the real world, Klein shook his head, put the gold coin and bottle back, wore his coat, trousers, and boots before sitting at the edge of his bed, leaning back against the pillow as he placed great caution on this turn of events. He still remembered his seer principles, especially the one about divination is not all-powerful, so even if the answers he received indicated it was safe, he didn't dare to relax and return to his slumber. This isn't to say that he didn't believe in the gray fog's ability to shield him from interference, but rather that there were too many possibilities. His divination statement might not be accurate enough to cover them all, resulting in his misinterpretation. He already had a guess about what had just happened. It was that the 4 adventurers in the restaurant had indeed found the abandoned and forgotten ancient temple in the primitive forest on Simeem Island. They had obtained wealth or cultural relics, but they had also stirred the barely surviving evil spirits, causing them to be plagued by evil thoughts and curses. Time ticked by, and Klein suddenly felt a subtle spirituality fluctuation spread out from the room and quickly blend into the surrounding darkness. The hidden flow that he had barely sensed vanished, and the tranquility of the night returned. As expected. It's a result of beyonder powers. It was solved just like that? I'll just wait a little longer. It would be dawn in an hour or 2 anyway. Even if there really is a problem, this place has a cathedral and a mandated punishers team. Klein half closed his eyes and began to engage in cogitation. Biam, a merest leaf bar. Danitz, determined to hoodwink any monitoring, carried a cup of Lanti-proof and drunkenly watched as the girls on the boxing ring danced a hot, sexy dance. Dogs hit. It's been so long since they've lost a single piece of clothing. He shouted with the other drunks. Then, ignoring whether they received any response, they laughed out loud, clinked glasses, and drank. Have you read the newspapers? A man who was fooling around in the bar late at night burped and said to his companions. Did your brain get eaten by a donkey? Do you think that I can read those twisting and turning letters of the alphabet? Holy Lord of Storms, I'm only interested in this kind of twisting and turning. Ha ha ha. His companion raised his glass and pointed at the dancers, laughing at what he thought was a humorous answer. The man who had spoken earlier smacked the back of his head. Steele is dead. He was killed by Blazing. The nearby Danitz was stunned for a moment, then he sat up, turning his head slightly. He cleared his throat and took a sip of the liquor, acting as if nothing had happened, but he secretly inched closer to hear what the others had to say about the matter. The adventurer and part-time pirate who had brought him into the trade had once said that life at sea would have been meaningless without liquor, women, and boasting. Steele? What steel? Let me tell you, when I was young, I once defeated a steel pipe. Another drunkard interrupted. What did you do to the steel pipe? Should I say something like, whoa, you're as sure as thin? The first man to speak revealed a knowing smile. He didn't wait for a reply as he continued, Steel Mavady is dead. The second mate of Admiral of Blood is dead. The last half of his words came out in a low growl. It frightened one of the fellows who was already wavering to slip to the bottom of the table as he raved in horror, "It wasn't me, I didn't do it." Dog's hit. A bar is always so chaotic. Hurry up and get to the point. I'm waiting for you to praise Lord Blazing. The disguised Danitz couldn't wait to smash the cup of alcohol in his hand at the group. The papers mentioned that it was jointly done by the Navy and the Church. Steel is dead, Blood Brambles is dead. Even Calm Squall is dead. John Smith and that bunch of assholes have been caught as well. A drunk who was still a little lucid came over and joined in on the conversation. No, no, no. That's not the truth. The man who raised the topic first shook his head with a smile. I have a friend working at the news agency. He told me that he has verifiable intel that cannot be published. The Navy and the Church were only used. The true murderer is Blazing Danitz and a mysterious, experienced, and powerful adventurer, a bounty hunter. Impossible. There's absolutely no way Blazing Danitz can defeat Steel. Even if it's a sneak attack, there's no way he can finish Steel. A few drinkers shared similar viewpoints. The crux is that powerful adventurer. I suspect he's an adventurer nearing the rank of a pirate admiral. The man who had started the conversation emphasized. I've no idea how Danitz got to know that guy. He contributed in the matter. Apparently, Blood Brambles was finished off by him. Didn't you notice? Blazing's bounty has increased to 4,200 pounds. That's right. Really? Blazing sure isn't simple. What a fierce pirate, no, a great pirate. Great pirates? I really couldn't tell the last time I drank with him. Pooey. You son of a bitch, when did I ever drink with you? I don't even know you. Amidst the exclamations, Danitz thought in delight. 4,200 pounds. If those fellows were to know, they would definitely get up at night to wipe the deck in envy. Ha ha ha, I can now be said to be the strongest bosun on the Golden Dream. At this moment, Danitz wished he could fly back to the ship and drink and brag with fellows like Iron Skin and Barrel, telling them all about the thrilling events in Bansi Harbor, how he had defeated the fallen bishop, how he had cleverly escaped from the ambush of Steel and the others, how he had set up a trap to finish off all his enemies, and how he would never be able to play the card game of life ever again. Unfortunately, for the sake of Captain, I still have to continue to be the servant of Gehrman Sparrow, that madman. Sigh, I'm already a great 4,200-pound pirate. Danitz sighed, allowing himself to continue to be paralyzed by the alcohol. As the Storm Cathedral's bells rang, the orange sun rose in the sky. The surroundings were still so quiet that only the sound of water could be heard. Without encountering anything abnormal, Klein exhaled in relief and took off his clothes, returned to bed, and made up for his lack of sleep by sleeping for another 2 more hours. His considerable spirituality allowed him to wake up at the scheduled time of 8:30 a.m. He washed up slowly, changed his clothes, and went to the first floor to buy a loaf of bread with cooked chestnuts and a glass of Gurney sap. He ate as he walked to the dock. Since he had already bought his return tickets for the 9 o'clock liner, Klein kept watch of the time and prepared to board the ship. At that moment, he saw the lady with the greenish-gray eyes, as well as the 3 male adventurers from her team. They were buying tickets at the ticket office. The liner is about to leave. They definitely wouldn't be able to make it in time for the 9 o'clock trip. I wonder what they obtained from the abandoned temple, but last night they attracted an existence similar to an evil spirit. Please don't let anything unexpected happen when they ride on the liner. Klein used his body to block the adventurer's line of sight, took out a gold coin, and made a divination. His revelation was that the later liner wouldn't be in danger. Klein hesitated for 2 seconds, looked at the passengers waiting for the 10 o'clock liner near the ticket office, rubbed his fingers together in silence, and lit the ticket in his palm. He went back to the ticket office as if nothing had happened and bought the 10 o'clock liner ticket for 4 soldi. Then, he went to the washroom at the docks, went above the grey fog, and quickly divined his worries. He knew very well that if the results showed that there were great dangers, he wouldn't take the risk of boarding the ship. Instead, he would find a way to prevent the ship from sailing and destroy it, if necessary, to prevent any innocents from dying. If the revelation was the same as the divination from before, he would write it normally while keeping a lookout for any accidents. In the end, he still received a negative answer. Klein was relieved and returned to the real world. He adjusted the position of the Murloc's bladder for quick access. If an accident really happened, this beyonder ingredient would become quite important in the vast ocean. This beyonder ingredient could also be used in a rudimentary, simple manner, just like the all-black eye which had been contaminated by the true creator. 10 o'clock sharp. Klein, in his Gehrman Sparrow appearance, picked up his suitcase, followed the adventurers, and boarded the liner. Along the way, he appeared to doze off or read old newspapers and magazines on the ship, but in actual fact, he was keeping an eye on the greenish-gray-eyed lady and her companions. This wariness continued all the way to the port of Byam, but no accidents occurred in the middle. Did they resolve all the problems? What did they actually get? Klein stopped by the side of the road, bought the latest newspaper from a newsboy, and watched the 4 adventurers from the corner of his eye until they disappeared. Phew. Klein decided to not think about it anymore. As long as it didn't endanger the overall situation, he wasn't concerned about what those people had done. He was just a little curious. He picked up his suitcase, leafing through the papers as he walked down Acid Lemon Street like an ordinary passerby. Suddenly, with a chuckle, he said to himself, the bounty for Danitz has risen to 4,200 pounds. If things continued like this, he suspected whether he could resist the urge of sending the fellow to the Governor-General's office. Walking back to the Wind of Azure Inn, Klein heard undulated snores that were slowly reaching a crescendo before he even took out his keys. He didn't escape? Klein was slightly surprised, but he wasn't too surprised either. He had previously tampered with Shadow Cloak, so as long as Danitz left, he could use divination methods to track him down and find the Vice Admiral Iceberg. Although he's timid, he's still cautious. Klein opened the door and entered, looking at Danitz, who awoke with a start. He grinned a little. Congratulations, Mr. 4,200 pounds. Danitz was instantly wide awake, wanting to laugh dryly in response, but he couldn't. At this moment, he felt that his life might be in danger. Danitz's worries didn't come true. Klein gave him a look and went into the bedroom to rest. During the 5 hours he spent on the liner, he had always been in a highly tense state. He had also been alarmed last night and didn't sleep well as a result. At this moment, he couldn't help but feel exhausted. With a thud, Klein closed the bedroom door. Phew. He scared me to death. Danitz relaxed and slumped into the reclining chair. The scene of him turning into gold pounds had surfaced in his mind a moment ago. He found it difficult to stop having these scenes appear one after another in his mind. After a moment of silence, Danitz, who had been hanging around the bar until dawn, fell asleep again without realizing it. He dreamed that the captain had arrived to save him, but she had failed. Instead, she got caught by Gehrman Sparrow and ended up becoming a maidservant for this crazy adventurer. Just as Danitz was outraged and unable to resist, he suddenly saw the blurry scene around him turn clear just as he was about to wake up. The scene froze on the luxurious suite of the Wind of Azure Inn. Knock. 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 Danitz heard a slow, soothing knock on the door. Wasn't I dreaming? With this question in mind, Danitz walked over to the door and turned the handle. As the crack in the door widened, he saw a familiar figure. She was a beautiful lady, with a face shaped like a goose egg, a high nose bridge, thin lips, and a pair of pale blue eyes that resembled clear spring water. Her long brown hair parted in the middle, tied in a simple but delicate knot at the back of her head as they flowed down. She didn't wear a hat, only wearing a beige coat which was tied at the waist. Her collar was covered with palm-sized flowers woven from white lace. Matching her coat was a dark-colored skirt which reached her knees. The pleats of her skirt were connected, looking slightly fluffy. On her feet were a pair of leather boots that shared the same color as her hair. "Captain!" Danitz cried out in alarm. He hurriedly snapped out of his reverie, turned around and faced Gehrman Sparrow's bedroom while taking a defensive stance. "Be careful." Run. A lunatic is looking for you. He has a terrifying organization backing him. As the feeling of self-sacrifice welled up in him, Danitz heard his captain calmly say, "This is a dream." Dream. Yeah, I'm dreaming, what's there to be afraid of? Danitz glanced left and right, folded his arms, turned around, and said, "Captain, you simulated the powers of a nightmare? That can't be right, you were near Sonia Island just last week." The largest island in this region of the Sonia Sea, which was also the origin of its name. It was almost like a small continent originally, it was the only remaining gathering place for the elves after the cataclysm, but as time passed, this ancient Beyonder race was plagued by all sorts of factors and gradually died out. The occasional sighting of them proved that they hadn't completely gone extinct. At the end of the Fourth Epoch, the Lone Kingdom occupied this island, but in the 20-Year War, they suffered a terrible defeat, handing over Sonia Island to the Fasak Empire. That was already more than 7 centuries ago. Sonia Island was situated north-northwest of the Rorstad archipelago, and it took nearly half a month by ship to arrive there. Vice Admiral Iceberg Edwina Edwards was still in the vicinity of Sonia Island last week, so it was impossible to reach Byam within a week. Unless she could fly or use the spirit world to travel. The beautiful lady whom Danitz addressed as Captain nodded. "We have just entered the Rorstad seas, still 1,000 nautical miles away from Byam. In other words, she'll take another 3 to 4 days before arriving?" "That's what I call normal." Danitz curiously asked, "This should have already surpassed the range of a nightmare?" "Moreover, it far exceeds," he added inwardly. Vice Admiral Iceberg Edwina entered the room and walked towards the table and chair. "It's not a nightmare power, but a secret ritualistic magic. It uses an item left behind on the ship to enter the dream of someone very far away." Listening to the captain's meticulous explanation, Danitz instantly felt as if he had returned to the Golden Dream and was beginning his lesson. "I've never heard of such ritualistic magic before." "Yes, Captain has mastered many strange and rare magic and witchcraft. No one can tell how much knowledge she possesses. She seems to have mentioned that her sequence name is Mysticism Magister. Sigh, if I had known that she had this secret technique, then I wouldn't have been so frustrated over how to inform her about the unexpected events in Byam." Danitz interrupted Edwina's description with a flurry of thoughts. "Captain, you sense that there's a problem with our point of contact over here?" "Yes, this is another secret technique." Edwina seemed inclined to describe the specific method in detail. Seeing this, Danitz hurriedly sighed. Poor old Rin and the others. Edwina stopped walking and turned her back to the window, asking succinctly, "What happened?" "I have to start from Demir Harbor." Danitz felt energized, as if his long-lasting depression had finally paid off at that moment. He described his attempts to recruit Gehrman Sparrow, but he ended up discovering that he was a madman, and he also exaggerated his plight on the White Agate. According to the rough draft he had prepared last night, he thoroughly described the weird and horrifying situation at Bansi Harbor, including the ambush and assassination attempt involving Steel Mavadi. He explained everything about how he joined forces with Gehrman Sparrow for a counterattack and hunt, as well as his own theories about Gehrman Sparrow's background and powers. This included creeping hunger and the secretive, powerful organization. During this process, he tried his best to restore the truth, only exaggerating the role he played, raising his status from servant or attendant to an assistant or collaborator. Vice Admiral Edwina listened quietly the entire time without interrupting him. When he was done, she nodded lightly and said, "He has no ill intentions." "Him? Gehrman Sparrow means no harm?" Danitz quickly said, "Captain, regardless, he's a dangerous fellow." "Are you sure he means no harm?" "I can't be sure," Edwina replied very calmly. "Then why were you?" Danitz took a silent breath, sensing the similarity between his captain and Gehrman Sparrow. They were people who he couldn't engage in a conversation with. Vice Admiral Iceberg Edwina said with a straight face, "That's just my speculation and judgment." Danitz rubbed his temples with his right hand. "Anyway, he's dangerous. There's a secret organization backing him, and I've no idea about the situation of the organization." Captain, I don't think you should take the risk of communicating with him, even if he claims to have something to ask of you. Edwina thought for a moment before saying, there's no need to take risks. I can communicate with him through you. Danitz first heaved a sigh of relief before asking both curiously and expectantly, Captain, how will that work? Or should I say, what do I need to do? Edwina raised her right hand, revealing a stand and a blackboard in her dream. I need you to hold a ritual, she said. It's called a soulfall ritual. It allows my soul to pass through the spirit world and attach itself to your body. I'll be able to converse directly with Gehrman Sparrow. It works on anyone below that of a demigod, with an effective distance of no more than 500 nautical miles. It involves reason and communication, and it belongs to the realm of the god of knowledge and wisdom. You must draw the corresponding symbols and magic labels. In mysticism, the blue star corresponds to the god of knowledge and wisdom. Mercury, brass, lavender, pepper, and mint are needed. Blue star corresponds to Saturday. The time of the blue star is from midnight to 1 on Friday, and 11 to 12 noon on Saturday. Edwina explained as she wrote the key points to remember on the blackboard, and Danitz instinctively sat down and assumed a listening posture. As he listened, he suddenly felt at a loss. Why do I need to attend classes even in my dreams? In the bedroom, Klein, who was sleeping, suddenly jolted awake, having vaguely sensed something. He got out of bed and listened for a moment in the living room. Although Danitz was snoring, his breathing was calmer than before. It wasn't too strange, but it was sufficiently unusual for an experienced senior expert in mysticism like Klein, who had been through a lot. He softly walked to the door that separated the bedroom from the living room, reached for the handle, and slowly turned it. Without a sound, Klein walked out of the bedroom and saw Danitz lying in a reclining chair, fast asleep. Everything around him appeared normal. Klein quietly activated his spirit vision and checked Blazing, but he didn't find anything amiss. Whether it was the color of his aura or the changes in his mood, there was nothing abnormal about him, all within a reasonable range. After watching for a while, Klein frowned and took out a silver charm. Dream charm. In the dream, Danitz was learning the soulfall ritual with a bitter expression. He had no doubt that the captain in front of him was genuine. No one can fake such a style and hobby. At that moment, he heard the sound of the lock turning. Subconsciously, Danitz looked towards the bedroom, where the crack in the door was widening, and Gehrman Sparrow, who was wearing only a white shirt, walked out expressionlessly. You. How did you appear here? Danitz shot to his feet, blurting out in shock. He quickly snapped to his senses and stammered, this is my dream. How is Gehrman Sparrow appearing so easily? With one hand in the pocket of his dark trousers, Klein walked toward the woman who had her back to the window and said in a low voice, a charm. Then, looking directly at the woman, he asked almost with certainty, Edwina Edwards? Her attire is a little strange. She doesn't look like an adventurer, much less a pirate. She looks like a woman with a decent job, someone who can support herself on her own. The style of her attire looks like it comes from Intis. Klein thought, feeling somewhat unaccustomed. Edwina nodded slightly and similarly replied with a question, Gehrman Sparrow? Yes, good afternoon, ma'am. Klein smiled slightly, pressed his hand to his chest, and bowed. Edwina nodded and replied, good afternoon. Klein, who was maintaining his persona, stopped talking, waiting for the other side to take the initiative to ask him about his purpose. He looked at Edwina. Edwina looked at him. There was a sudden silence in the dream for several minutes. From time to time, Danitz looked to the right and to the left, having a baffling feeling that perhaps all of this might really be a dream. Unable to tolerate the situation, Danitz decided to do something about the situation. He coughed twice and faced Vice Admiral Iceberg Edwina Edwards and said, Captain, Mr. Gehrman Sparrow has some questions for you? Phew. Klein let out a sigh of relief. If this stare down continued, he felt as though his persona would collapse. Edwina gently nodded her head, looked at Klein, and said, Mr. Sparrow, have you received education? What kind of question is this? Klein's expression didn't change as he indifferently replied, "University graduate." Ah? Danitz looked at Gehrman Sparrow in surprise, unable to believe the fact that this crazy adventurer and bounty hunter had actually gone to university and even graduated. He had no way of putting a university, a hallmark of wisdom, with that of Gehrman Sparrow together. Unless it's some hunter university or killer academy. Or a university that exists only in the fantasies of madmen and psychopaths. Danitz couldn't help but lampoon silently. Edwina didn't seem surprised. She continued to ask, "What languages have you mastered?" Klein resisted the urge to frown and said, "Jotun, Elvish, Dragonese, Ancient Hermes, Ancient Fasak, Loanese." Edwina responded tersely. "Do you understand the other domains in mysticism?" Feeling adrift for a moment, Klein felt like he had returned to his previous life's elementary school days. Due to his age handicap, he had been asked a series of questions by a teacher, such as how many Chinese characters he had mastered, if he had mastered the 4 arithmetic operations, whether he knew the English alphabet, and how many Tang Dynasty poems he could recite. "Calm down. You're Gehrman Sparrow now," Klein once again said without emotion, "adept." Edwina thought for 2 seconds and then explained in an unhurried manner, "I have to combine your standard of knowledge with how I would answer the questions so that you can understand the answers more easily." This. Klein was surprised to find that the beautiful lady in front of him was nothing like an adventurer acting as a part-time pirate. She was basically a teacher with a cold expression but a kind and patient attitude. He calmed down after thinking about the vampire that headed for the Church of Mother Earth daily. "This is the first pirate admiral I'm officially meeting. She's indeed unique." Klein secretly sighed and said, "First question, where do beyonder creatures appear at sea?" "The commonly seen ones." He didn't directly ask about mermaids, as he didn't want her to see through his real purpose, which would lead to unnecessary accidents. Edwina thought for a moment and then wiped the soulfall ritual off the blackboard. She then wrote and drew. "Set off from Sonia Island, sail 1,200 nautical miles in this direction and you'll enter the depths of the sea which humans have never explored. There is a Naga tribe active there. They've been working hard to find the underwater city which is rumored to have a powerful demon sealed within. That's the entity of their faith." Edwina spoke in detail, partly from her own efforts to find the treasure itself, and partly from the knowledge and rumors she had exchanged. It took her a while to finish the general story, but to Klein's dismay, there were no mermaids anywhere except in the eastern waters of the Gargas archipelago. He quickly calmed his mood and said, "Second question, do you know how to remove the mental corruption from a beyonder characteristic?" He didn't hide the fact that he knew about beyonder characteristics. Edwina's eyes flickered for the first time, as though she had a new understanding of Gehrman Sparrow. She shook her head. "I don't know. However, I once imagined that it's possible by borrowing the power of an external force and completely crushing the corrupted beyonder characteristic to reduce it to the smallest specks of light. This way, whether it's corrupted or cursed, they will scatter having lost their vessel. They would rapidly or slowly vanish. As for the shattered beyonder characteristic, it will gather bit by bit due to their particular traits, eventually taking form again. Unfortunately, only gods can do this. If you get the favor of any god, you can try to please them by offering enough sacrifices and pray for a response. The law of convergence of beyonder characteristics." In his mind, Klein filled in what Edwina had purposely left out. At the same time, he couldn't help but sigh. This Vice Admiral Iceberg, captain of the Golden Dream, was extremely knowledgeable in mysticism. She wasn't worse than him, someone who had read many of Roselle's diary entries and had experienced many things. It was said that Vice Admiral Iceberg can replicate or simulate the beyonder powers of her opponents when they use them in front of her. This is rather similar to Mr. Isengard Stanton's 2-081 ring. As soon as Klein's thoughts began to wander, he forcefully reined them back, and he nodded as if he was thinking about something. "I agree with this hypothesis. Regretfully, I haven't done it in practice. It's only a conjecture." Edwina rarely used a word that described emotion. Danitz, who had been listening by the side, had a dazed look on his face. He was unable to keep up with the conversation at all. What are they talking about? What are they discussing? Why do I know every word, but know nothing when they're strung together? What's a beyonder characteristic? What does shattering it do? What does it gathering together represent? Danitz looked left and right, his eyes blank. At this point, Klein threw out the third question he had thought about: where can you find ancient wraiths? He only mentioned this kind of monster because the corresponding ingredients could also be used in the domain of death. It didn't expose the secrets of his own sequence. Edwina glanced at Danitz and said, I keep an eye out for you. If you want to attend Biome's Beyonder gatherings, he knows a few. He can take you there. Not bad, it's easier to talk to smart people. Klein added, do you know where there are people who can make mystical items out of Beyonder ingredients or characteristics? I met one at a gathering, but he never showed up again, Edwina answered frankly. I have grasped the corresponding knowledge. I can simulate it, but I cannot guarantee the success rate. Heh. I'll wait then. Klein didn't harp on the topic and switched to asking, how much do you know about Death's Key? Little. An iron-black key suddenly appeared in Edwina's hand. It was about the size of a lyre, its shape was ancient, and it had a dark luster. The pirate admiral said while half carrying the item from the shipwreck, if you mean this key, then I can tell you that it belongs to the giants. Klein glanced sideways at Danitz. Your bosun told me that it can also belong to a dragon or a demonic wolf. That was the earliest guess. I've recently found some historical documents. And with the help of the other items on the ship, I have a rudimentary idea. Edwina didn't show any agitation. She was filled with patience, but her expression remained cold. After finally regaining his sense as the owner of the dream, Danitz curiously asked, Captain, is it really the giants? Yes. Edwina gave an affirmative answer. That batch of documents showed that there were still many giants active in the fourth epoch. Some of them had switched faiths to the god of combat, while the others were left scattered, becoming the hunting targets of the humans. One of the tribes built a ship and tried to find the lost giant king's court at sea, never to return. The sunken ship we discovered, along with some of the items inside, are very similar to the relics they left behind in their original settlement, so we have sufficient reason to believe that the key belongs to the giants, and it is very likely to be pointed towards the lost giant king's court. Of their race before the cataclysm. Giant king's court? Little Sun said it's not far from the city of Silver. Klein didn't say a word, but he quietly listened to Vice Admiral Iceberg's description. I have to say, the city of Silver and the forsaken land of the gods are things I know that completely surpasses other Beyonders. Even the seven gods can't find that place, or they find it hard to figure out the exact situation. In this aspect, I'm stronger than them. Klein thought about it with a smug and self-deprecating manner before saying in a deep voice, if I offer a sufficient price, are you willing to sell the key? Of course, unless I acquire additional clues to the giant king's court. Edwina continued to speak at a moderate pace. Very good, if the Tarot Club organizes an expedition to the giant king's court one day, I will buy this key. Klein was about to ask the last question when he suddenly remembered the four adventurers. Relying on the power of the dream charm, he conjured the lady with greenish-gray eyes, who wore a man's shirt, and her three companions. Do you know them? Edwina took a glance and said almost without thinking, Letitia Dolera, an archaeologist and adventurer. Rumor has it that she's a member from the Moses Ascetic Order or the Element Dawn. Moses Ascetic Order. The ancient organization that believes in the hidden sage. It really isn't for money, and their goal is definitely something from the abandoned temple. Klein asked casually, what do you know about Element Dawn? This mysterious organization was similar to the psychology alchemists, having been born in the recent 1 to 200 years. It combined the elements of various schools of mysticism. It had its own set of theories, and its members were all proficient in spell casting and had mastery in many ancient witchcraft techniques. Edwina pursed her lips and said, they've always been fighting against the Moses Ascetic Order. Rumor has it that the eldest daughter of Emperor Roselle, Bernadette Gustave, established it. the element dawn is headed by Bernadette? Zeradal's prophecy is quite accurate after all. She can really be considered an important figure in the Beyonder world. Klein sighed inwardly, feeling somewhat enlightened. He resisted the urge to sigh and looked at Edwina. He calmly said, "One last question." When the beautiful lady and blazing Danet's attention was fully focused on him, he slowly opened his mouth. "Are you interested in cooperating?" "What kind of cooperation?" Edwina returned with a question. The smile on Klein's face became more and more exuberant. With a hint of madness in it he said, "Hunt Admiral of Blood." "What? Hunt Admiral of Blood?" Danetz almost raised his right hand to his ear. His first reaction was that he had misheard. However, Gehrman Sparrow's smile with hidden madness and the slight movement of his captain's eyebrows, an abnormality of hers, reminded him that what was said had really happened. This madman Gehrman Sparrow really is daring. This is one of the 7 pirate admirals. They aren't people that a character like Steel Mavady can be compared with. Danetz's pupils shrank, his heart on the brink of roaring. Putting aside the fact that Admiral of Blood Seigneur's own might, just the pirates underneath him are intimidating enough. His first mate, third mate, and the captains of each ship are all capable of independently leading a large pirate crew. There are still many of the crew which Steel Mavady had brought to Byam with him in the Blood Pirate crew. When Vice Admiral Hurricane Kalangos died silently like a wild dog in Backland, it was mainly because he wasn't with his pirate crew. However, Admiral of Blood Seigneur is different. He seldom leaves his flagship and rarely leaves the company of his men. Even if the focus is placed back on Seigneur's strength, it would still be extremely terrifying. He's mysterious, bizarre, and is one of the few powerhouses at the sea who is second only to the 4 kings. Even Captain might not dare to claim to be his superior. A madman's guts really does exceed my imagination. No, he doesn't know the meaning of fear at all. The death and replacement of a pirate admiral will definitely be a great shock to the 5 seas. One thought after another flashed through Danetz's mind, but in the end, he strangely calmed down. It was because he recalled that Gehrman Sparrow was a powerhouse at the level of the 7 admirals, and there might be a hidden, terrifying organization backing him. Edwina said after a few seconds of silence, "Do you know of the Rose School of Thought?" "Not only do I know them, I've also killed their people and taken their mystical items." "Wait a minute, why do I have to describe myself as a bad guy?" Klein converged his smile and said in an unperturbed manner, "I've hunted their members." Edwina fell silent again. Next to her, Danetz once again had various thoughts. What are they talking about? What's the Rose School of Thought? Where am I? Whose dream is this? After a short moment of silence, Edwina said, "After the huge battle with Vice Admiral Dusk's pirate crew, Seigneur's crew vanished. At present, no one knows where they are. One will have to wait patiently." "Is this an agreement?" Klein once again revealed a smile. "I do not lack patience. How can I contact you?" Edwina turned her head to look at Danetz. "He knows how." "Me? Soulfall ritual?" "Wait a minute, Captain, you mean I have to follow this madman, Gehrman Sparrow, during this period of time?" "No. Who knows when this fellow will go crazy?" With a start, Danetz quickly opened his mouth and said, "Captain, I've already left the Golden Dream for too long. I've missed too many lessons. I can't wait to return." He tried his hardest to show his sincerity in his eyes, filling them with the desire for knowledge. "I believe we can switch to someone else, like Iron Skin and Beryl." Before he finished his sentence, Edwina suddenly raised her right hand and pressed it against her ear. She looked slightly to the side and said without expression, "What did you say?" "I couldn't hear it." "Roselle's dream spell is reaching its limits." The pirate admiral's skirt fluttered slightly as she took a step back before her figure quickly turned faint, reducing into points of fragmented light. The rest of Danetz's words were left stuck in his throat. He stretched out his right hand in an attempt to grasp something, but he ended up weakly drooping down. "Roselle's dream spell?" The Emperor's presence in the field of mysticism is also quite formidable. The full name of the Vice Admiral Iceberg is Edwina Edwards. Edwards. Isn't this the surname of one of the Emperor's 4 horsemen of the apocalypse? A descendant? However, from the tone of Vice Admiral Iceberg, she isn't familiar with the eldest daughter of the Emperor, Bernadette. They might not even know each other. Klein looked at Danitz, whose expression had completely collapsed, and let out a soft laugh. Perhaps one day I will call you Mr. 10,000 pounds. Danitz straightened his back in fright, then he saw Gehrman Sparrow's figure disappear from his dream. If I were only sequence 7 and had a bounty of 7 or 8,000 pounds, then I would be targeted everywhere I go. Danitz stood rooted in his dream, his head hurting the more he thought about it. In the evening, Danitz looked at Gehrman Sparrow, who was dressed as a native. Today, we'll be visiting the location faction. We might be able to find some good things there. Heh, they have a great need for beyonder ingredients, food, and weapons. At this point, Danitz looked Gehrman Sparrow up and down. It was rare for him to find something that he was better than him at. He said with a smile, their area is filled with local people. There aren't even many people with mixed blood. If there's even the slightest signs of an abnormality in their clothing, you will be discovered. Your pantaloons and brown jacket are fine, but you can't wear a shirt inside. A real native wears Taraba shirts, they're similar to Sea Soul shirts, but they're either all blue or white. They don't wear caps, headscarves, or anything. Also, people like you who look obviously Loanese will encounter very serious discrimination and hostility there, just like a wolf that sneaks into a flock of sheep. You can't hide your existence at all. Before he could finish, he saw Gehrman Sparrow tilt his head and look at him. His deep facial features quickly turned soft. His fair skin was instantly stained with the color of bronze. In just a snap, he had become an undeniable native that didn't stand out in any way. After a few seconds of silence, Danitz laughed dryly as if nothing had happened. Me too. I have to disguise myself. Your disguise? Heh. Klein took off his cap and sat down. What local faction? It actually trades beyonder ingredients, food, and weapons? Ahem, to put it simply, the resistance. Danitz suddenly wasn't sure if Gehrman Sparrow had any connections with the lone officials. Klein was startled for a second. Resistance? Danitz smiled awkwardly and said, people who clamor for independence and for natives to administer their local affairs. Their encampment is deep in the woods or at sea. They cooperate with many pirates and adventurers. Of course, the ones backing them are mainly people from Fasak and Intis. Often, there will be priests from the god of combat and the eternal blazing sun secretly coming over. Byam isn't that calm after all. After leaving the kingdom and coming to the sea, Klein finally understood what it meant by an international situation. This wasn't something that could be compared to reading about wars in East Balam from the papers. He nodded slightly and didn't object to visiting the local faction. After leaving the Wind of Azure Inn, Klein followed Danitz, whose face was painted black. They went through the streets, heading all the way southeast. Leaving the confines of the City of Generosity, they entered a zone filled with different architectural styles. The buildings here had raised floors, propped up by wooden pilings. There were 3- or 4-story buildings that had evolved from the Lone-style terrace houses. The roads that split from each other were narrow and dirty, with many stalls on either side. They sold all kinds of headgear, earrings, and accessories made of stone. They were mostly bright red or multicolored. What a bunch of strange fellows. They especially like bright colors, just like those venomous snakes in the forest, Danitz whispered. As someone from Intis, you aren't much better either. You advocate the color of gold, and advocate a sense of luxury and exquisiteness, just like a nouveau riche. Klein lampooned. They passed by a group of dark-skinned, skinny, and shriveled natives, entering the alleys which had clothes drying over their heads. The scene before their eyes suddenly opened up, revealing a small municipal square. On the square, a group of locals was gathered around the central pond. Some were kneeling, some were prostrating, some were mumbling, and some were singing softly. They had devout expressions, but they looked numbed. As soon as they realized that someone was approaching, they quickly got up and ran into the surrounding alleys in a flurry. All the windows on the second, third, and fourth floors of the surrounding houses clanged shut, and the square grew quiet, but Klein's spiritual perception told him that there were many people behind the windows, around the alleys, in the dark corners, watching these strangers who had suddenly arrived in their world. Danitz lowered his head and said in a suppressed voice, "Don't worry, this is their way of protecting themselves." "Oh?" Klein expressed his doubts. Danitz let out a chuckle. Before this place was completely colonized, the natives on the Rorstad archipelago always believed in sea god Calvetua. They believed that this deity who appears in the form of a gigantic sea serpent would protect all the islands here, preventing them from being devoured by earthquakes or tsunamis. Now that this belief has been outlawed, the Church of the Lord of Storms has been constantly fighting against the heretics. Even the Church of Evernight and the Church of Steam and Machinery are unable to expand their influence here, and there are only a few cathedrals. But in fact, how can the faith that has been in place for centuries, if not a millennium, be so easily eradicated? There are still plenty of believers of the sea god in Biome, Blue Mountain Island, and the Rorstad Sea. Even if a bunch of people are captured every 1 to 2 months, a situation in which they suffer all kinds of extreme punishment, it's impossible to reverse this situation anytime soon. The Resistance's main pillar of support are the believers of the sea god. In my opinion, it will take at least another 100 years before the faith of the sea god will be completely eradicated. Of course, that's under the premise that there aren't any other disruptive elements. Sea god Calvetua. Its image is of a gigantic sea serpent. As Klein listened thoughtfully, he followed Danitz into a 4-story house on the right. He went to the top floor via a narrow staircase. Knock. 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 Danitz knocked on the door to his left. "Who is it?" someone asked in a low voice. Danitz replied with a chuckle, "A friend who brings wine and barbecue." "Where from?" the person inside asked a strange question. Danitz stepped back. "At sea." Creak. The door slowly opened and Klein saw a naked arm. The arm was tattooed with a blue, hideous sea serpent. Behind the door was a bare-chested man with a hideous blue sea serpent tattooed on his arm and short streaks of red paint painted on the sides of his cheeks, chest, and abdomen, each group formed out of 3 streaks. Really exotic. However, aren't you afraid of being too conspicuous? Aren't you afraid of being caught by the police while you're outside? You're part of the resistance that engages in secret operations. Klein was about to retract his gaze when he was almost forced to frown by the man's thick, messy eyebrows and cold-blooded eyes. He has killed many people. Klein made a rough judgment based on his spiritual intuition. Honestly speaking, due to his previous life's identity and knowledge, he initially held a lot of sympathy for the rebels under colonial rule. However, after hearing that the man and the followers of the sea god Calvetua basically engaged in the same acts, he became even more wary and repulsed. This wasn't to say that he discriminated against the local faith, but rather, he understood that the traditional faith of all the colonial islands was still in a primitive stage that believed in sacrifice. They worshipped with food and blood, using living sacrifices, and were still in a state of complete ignorance. In addition, with the experiences of the Emperor and myself, the beyonder nature of this world is filled with madness and twistedness. A deity still in the primitive stage of sacrifice is basically unable to resist this trend. It's quite obvious what kind of style they follow. Without a word, Klein followed Danitz into the room. "Edmonton, who's here?" A mild voice sounded from the area near the windows. The tattooed man closed the door and said, "They'd disguised themselves." At that moment, Klein had taken a good look at the situation in the room and gained a basic understanding of it. The living room wasn't very large. A cupboard, a table, and a few chairs were enough to make it look cramped. To the right were 2 doors leading to what appeared to be a bedroom, to the left was a kitchen separated by a cabinet. As for the washroom, there was no doubt that there wasn't one. When Klein went upstairs, he discovered that there was a common washroom at the corner of each flight of stairs. The stench of them not being washed for extended periods of time urged any passers-by to walk up faster. Directly in front of him was a window. 2 bamboo poles hung out and were used to hang a lot of clothes to dry. There were 4 or 5 men sitting or standing in the bedroom's doorway and the living room. All of them were dark-skinned natives with slightly curly hair. They wore dark blue taraba shirts and more or less had red paint on their bare skin, and as for the sea serpent tattoo, Klein couldn't tell if it was there or not because of the clothing. Some of them had revolvers at their waists, some carrying brownish-red hunting rifles. Some even carried gray steel backpacks and long, thick high-pressure steam rifles. They formed a semicircle around Danitz and Klein, who had just entered the room. The person who spoke was a wheelchair-bound man in his 40s. He wore a jacket and had a blanket over his knees. He had a shaved head, a slightly green beard on both sides of his face, and his dark brown eyes were calm and collected. He glanced at his visitor and slowly smiled. Blazing. Danitz was stunned for a moment before forcing out a laugh. Kalat, you have a good eye. Dog's hit. Am I so bad at disguising myself? He roared inwardly, unwilling to accept the fact. Kalat ignored Blazing's insincere praise and instead chuckled. I heard that you killed steel and blood brambles? How else would they be dead? Danitz retorted without hesitation. Kalat narrowed his eyes, slowly shifting his gaze to Klein, who had a featureless face. He knew very well that Blazing Danitz alone would have a hard time killing blood brambles Hendry, much less Steel Mavady. His success was rumored to be due to the help of a powerful adventurer, a seasoned bounty hunter. Is it the person beside him? When he looked into Klein's eyes, he didn't see any nervousness, worry, or vigilance. Those eyes were like a deep ocean. It could very well be. At the very least, he's stronger than Blazing. He signaled to Edmonton and the others with his eyes, secretly informing them to be on their guard. What are you doing here? Kalat didn't pursue the subject. Danitz subconsciously looked at Klein, and after seeing his nod of affirmation, he replied, here to see what good things you have to offer. Kalat pointed to a table and said, it's all placed there. There were many strange and different items laid out, including a whistle made of bone, a simple and crude bagpipe, an iron-black leaf, and a rock stained with blood. Without waiting for Klein and Danitz to examine the items, Kalat clapped his hands and said, I have a mission. If you can complete it, you can freely choose an item from these at no additional cost. He laughed and added, by the definition of you foreigners, they aren't mystical objects, but they all have some supernatural power, but it will slowly, yes, slowly weaken until it disappears. What mission? Klein asked calmly, having no intention of hiding the fact that Danitz was only a follower. He reached into the blanket that extended to his knees and took out a stack of white paper. Find out where they are. If you can catch them directly, you will get even more. He raised his arms and began to display lifelike portraits, including a lady with greenish-gray eyes dressed in a man's shirt. Letitia Dolera. Klein recognized who the resistance was looking for at a glance. It was the female archaeologist and adventurer he had met last night and had boarded the same ship with this morning. She was suspected to be a member of the Moses Ascetic Order or the Element Dawn. Danitz looked at it closely for 2 seconds and found the picture vaguely familiar. Suddenly, he remembered where he had seen her before. Gehrman Sparrow had shown it in his dreams. He had just asked the captain about it in the afternoon, and were already bumping into something relevant in the evening. Isn't he too resourceful at gathering information? Danitz resisted his urge to glance at the crazy adventurer beside him, afraid that Kalat and Edmonton would notice something amiss. He was very experienced in this area. The resistance, who believe in the sea god, are looking for Letitia. The faith of the sea god spreads throughout the Rorstad archipelago, including Simim. There was a snake last night. The image of the sea god is that of a gigantic sea serpent. Klein superimposed the two matters together and quickly came to a preliminary conclusion. Archaeologist Letitia and company had obtained an important item involving the sea god in the forgotten temple in the ancient forest of Simim Island. Hence, it resulted in last night's probing and the Resistance's search. Klein thought for a moment, then he gave a perfunctory reply, I'll keep an eye out. I won't randomly get myself involved in matters related to evil spirits. Of course, if it's necessary, then I will report it to the officials." He silently added a few words inwardly. Kalat nodded and said, "Take a look first and see if there's anything you want." Klein walked over and was just about to inquire as he made his selection when he suddenly sensed something and subconsciously looked towards the right side of the item pile. There was a short sword made of thin bones. It was slightly longer than a forearm and had a milky white body. There were a few dark red deep stripes on it. "It can trigger my spiritual perception." Klein stretched out his right hand in an attempt to pick up the sharp bone sword that was placed right at the front, to carefully examine it. The moment his fingers touched the bone sword, cries of despair and pain suddenly echoed in his mind. A thick stench of blood faintly appeared at the tip of his nose, and he seemed to see many distorted and rotten illusory figures that were covered in mucus. Klein's forehead ached, as though he had been pierced by a needle, and he subconsciously retracted his finger. A little sinister. "It's not a simple item." Klein, who had experienced things far more intense before, only showed a slight change in expression. He resisted the urge to activate his spirit vision, afraid that he would see something he shouldn't. Noticing this, Kalat exchanged glances with Edmonton and said with a smile, "This bone sword is capable of draining an enemy's blood. It's not bad. Do you want it?" A little proactive. Klein frowned, relaxed his brows immediately, and then he said in a deep voice, "No, there's nothing I want here." If Kalat hadn't asked, he was even planning on buying the bone sword and researching it above the grey fog. However, the fact that the man promoted it had left him vigilant. Thus, he rationally abandoned his original plans. Kalat crossed his hands and said, "It's not expensive at all. Or would you like to look at something else?" "There's no need." Klein's pupils shrank suddenly as he turned and walked straight towards the door. Danitz hesitated momentarily before hurrying after him. Edmonton, who had a sea serpent tattoo on his arm, watched silently. He seemed as if he would reach out and stop them at any moment, but in the end, he didn't do anything. They were the powerful adventurers who had killed Steel Mavady and Blood Brambles Hendry. Once out of the room, Klein stomped down the stairs without saying a word. Danitz ran after him, alarmed. Based on his take of the situation, he didn't inquire about the situation and only followed. The two quickly returned to the square, and the crowd which had gathered once again to either kneel or prostrate scattered once more. But unlike before, there was a man who had still remained kneeling on the ground, motionless. Klein didn't even glance at him as he walked past without stopping. However, Danitz had taken a subconscious look, only to discover that the man's face was as dry as a weathered rock. "Pa!" A piece of flesh from the man's cheek fell to the ground. It was a piece of grayish skin with facial hair attached to it. He seemed to have lost all the moisture in his body. Danitz was startled and didn't dare to look again, feeling that things had become strange and dangerous. At some point the two of them passed through the alleys, left the city, and boarded a rental carriage. The carriage driver was obviously a native, around 40 years old, and his laughter was very pleasing. But along the way, he didn't say a word. It was so quiet that it made Danitz feel like his heart was beating like a drum. Klein pursed his lips and remained silent. The rental carriage quickly arrived at the dock area. In order to change his attire, Danitz got it to stop a distance from Acid Lemon Street. After getting off the carriage, Klein didn't pay the fare or stop. He immediately took large strides and left, leaving Danitz stunned. He tossed 2 solely to the carriage driver and hurriedly chased after Gehrman Sparrow. After a few steps, he looked back and saw the driver kneeling down with a face full of zeal and devoutness. He leaned over the ground and kissed the ground where Klein had stepped. "What's happening?" Danitz couldn't believe what he was seeing. This didn't shock him, but it left him inexplicably terrified. It was like jumping into a bucket filled with ice when drunk, feeling a bone-piercing chill permeate his body from the soles of his feet to his head. What exactly happened? Why did things become so strange? Danitz took a breath, forcing himself to turn his head, and he chased after Gehrman Sparrow. He found the crazy adventurer walking faster and faster, to the point where he had to run with small paces to keep up. Crossing the street and through the alley, Danette suddenly saw a greenish shadow fall from a tree. Pa! Its body was covered in scales as it twisted its slippery body and had a triangular head. It extended its scarlet forked tongue and was none other than a rather long venomous snake. Dog's hit. Why would there be snakes in this season? Danette wasn't afraid of such creatures. He had even roasted snake meat before, but it was the abnormality of everything that left him agitated. Circling around the coiling snake, Danette subconsciously looked left and right and found that on both sides of the gutter, in the corners of ruined houses, and on the insides of rusty water pipes, there were pairs of cold, vertical, and different-colored eyes looking out. Danette felt a chill run down his spine, as if his scalp had been pierced by a dense array of fine needles. He didn't dare to stay any longer, nor did he dare to leave. He increased his speed again and followed closely behind Gehrman Sparrow. Entering the Wind of Azure Inn, he couldn't help but look up as he walked up the wooden stairs, wanting to ask something. Suddenly, his chest tightened and his breathing stagnated. At that moment, it was as if he had dived into the bottom of the sea, being pressed down by the heavy torrents of water from every direction. Whoosh! Faintly, Danette heard the rush of the tide and saw a faint, illusory light surround Gehrman Sparrow, as if it were forming an endless, bottomless blue ocean. Within that ocean, there was an enormous azure blue figure holding everything up. It resembled a tower. This. Danette's right foot stopped in midair, unable to lower his foot. He wasn't unfamiliar with such feelings. Back at the last pirate convention, the King of the Five Seas, Nast, was even more imposing and terrifying than this. Almost all the pirates couldn't lift their heads, and even powerhouses at the admiral rank could only barely resist. Danette knew very well that it wasn't a result of Gehrman Sparrow's own powers. If he was at the level of a demigod, there was no need to include the mandated punishers during his hunt of Steel Mavati. Ocean. Tide. These two terms flashed through Danette's mind, and he immediately thought of the matter of the Resistance's faith in sea god Calvetua. Could it be that Gehrman Sparrow suffered the sea god's curse via an unknown process when he touched the bone sword? The devotee's corpse that lost all its moisture is one of the conditions for the curse's activation? When the carriage driver prostrated and kissed the ground, was it because he sensed the sea god's aura? Man. Gehrman Sparrow would probably die here today. Should I stay far away to avoid being implicated? At the very most, I'll come back to collect his corpse. It might still be possible to save him. I can use the soulfall ritual to seek Captain's help. She knows so many different kinds of odd secret techniques. She should be able to resolve this problem. No, Lord. The soulfall ritual has a requirement of being within 500 nautical miles. They're still en route, and it will take at least half a day to enter that range. As he desperately tried to think of something, Danette stopped panicking and treaded steadily into the luxurious suite with Gehrman Sparrow. Klein still remained silent, but his dark brown eyes seemed to have a rich azure blue color that was nearing the color of black. He went straight to the bedroom and locked the door behind him. Danette stood outside, in a dilemma on whether to flee or save the man. Inside the bedroom, Klein closed his eyes, waiting for the right opportunity. Suddenly, he took 4 steps in a counterclockwise manner, chanting a statement with each step. A wave of manic or high-pitched ravings rapidly rang in his ears as his spirit body shot up into the gray fog. Without a sound, he heard an indescribable, shrill, and painful howl. Klein appeared within the ancient palace, at the very end of the long, mottled table. In the motionless gray fog below, an illusory, gigantic azure blue sea serpent appeared. It was located in an ancient dark ruin, coiled around a half-collapsed pillar. Its hideous head was raised, and its bloody mouth was wide open, revealing many curved fangs that were even longer than a human's forearm. On its milky white fangs, there were layers upon layers of flowing blood and mucus. This sea serpent madly swung its tail, setting off terrifying waves and ridiculous ripples, causing the entire ruins to sway, as if it was about to collapse. The scene rapidly shattered and dimmed. Regardless of how the unimaginably large sea serpent struggled, it was unable to turn the situation around. All it could do was let out a long, painful scream in agony as it was reduced to points of light before disappearing into the gray fog. Klein sat in the high-backed chair belonging to the fool as he quietly watched everything. He didn't make any superfluous actions for a long time. The gray fog silently spread out, and the scene seemed to return to its eternally unchanging state. After nearly a minute, Klein leaned back in his chair, sighed, and said the serpent's name, sea god Calvetua. After coming into contact with the bone sword, he had already felt the abnormality. And during his conversation with Baldi Kalat, he had keenly discovered that a tiny, weak but extremely cold and sinister energy had invaded his body at some point in time and was slowly corrupting his soul. Klein made a prompt decision and turned around to leave. He then sensed that there was a connection between the sinister power and his surroundings. It gradually strengthened and slowly connected to an unknown place. So, as he diverted attention to resist the corruption, he also controlled himself so as to not interact with his surroundings. Klein believed that as long as he responded to the abnormality on his journey back, it would only serve to intensify the corruption, to the point of making irreversible. At first, he wanted to find a nearby washroom and use the gray fog's shielding and isolation to remove the cold and sinister power, but after repeated considerations, he decided to leave the area. This was because there were many followers of the sea god around, and it was extremely likely for an accident to happen. During this process, Klein grasped another point, which was that if he dispelled it ahead of time, the power projected by sea god Calvetua would leave remnants in his flesh and blood. The consequences and effects would be unknown. He had no choice but to patiently wait for the opportunity to purify himself by waiting for the cold and sinister energy to thoroughly permeate his spirit. Reflecting on everything that had happened, Klein lightly rapped the edge of the table and muttered to himself, "It's not that strong." The sea god's level was much lower than he had imagined. His original plan was to use the method that had finished off Amon's avatar to deal with the sea god Calvetua's projection, which was trying to take over his body. However, even before he had even fused with the Dark Emperor card or through his paper angel, Calvetua ended up being dispelled by the gray fog directly, without leaving a single trace. On this basis, Klein concluded that sea god Calvetua's level was inferior to blasphemer Amon, even though it was possible that the latter was more adept at intrusion, but it had only been an avatar. Was it thrown off its pedestal by the Lord of Storms, or is it not even at the level of an angel? It's just a slightly stronger demigod that can respond to the prayers of its believers within a certain range? Klein recalled and found that sea god Calvetua was in an abnormal state. The foundational existence of this evil spirit is rather weak, as though it can collapse at any moment. Moreover, it felt like it had fused with the spirit world and the ruins it was in. And it's precisely as a result of this that it was able to escape the encirclement of the Church of Storms? Klein leaned back in his chair and made a guess. What happened today is definitely not a coincidence. It stems from archaeologist Letitia's act of taking away some important artifact in the Forgotten Temple. It caused sea god Calvetua's condition to instantly deteriorate when it was already barely surviving. It made it impossible for it to hold on to its existence. As it got its believers to track the item, it also prepared to possess another body for its survival. That bone sword should have originated from its demigod body, and it hides a bit of the power it projects. As long as the target is suitable, it will infiltrate the body of the person who touches it, corrupting the soul, and establishing the coordinates. It will then allow its spirit to be transferred over before it dissipates. But clearly, it's not adept in such matters. Yes, it's not the snake of Mercury. It's unable to create a closed loop on itself for reincarnation. It's also not like blasphemer Amon, who can be a parasite inside a person's soul. To really possess my body, it will directly cause its body to crumble and create a terrifying monster. According to this logical development, the dying Calvetua will likely engage in many crazy actions in the near future. Klein frowned. He didn't hesitate as he plummeted into the fog and returned to the real world. He unlocked the door, opened it, and entered the living room, startling the pacing Danitz. Danitz looked him up and down a few times and asked cautiously and warily, "Are you all right?" Klein maintained Gehrman Sparrow's persona and calmly replied, "It's settled." Settled? Danitz looked around before glancing at the bedroom, wondering if he had been hallucinating, that there wasn't any sea god curse. What did he do in the bedroom? He was lifted from the curse of the sea god in just a minute or two. Man, this guy has a huge secret. Danitz took 2 steps back and made way. Beside a table covered with a significant number of miscellaneous items, the wheelchair-bound Baldy, Kalat, wore a look of regret as he said to the tattooed man, "What a pity. Just a little more." He didn't pick it up, just touched it. Edmonton sighed as well. Kalat looked at the slightly bent bone sword and fervently said to himself, "When an outsider picks up that holy sword, God will walk the land again." Edmonton fell to his knees as well, as though confessing to a deity. As time passed, both Kalat and Edmonton suddenly heard 2 miserable shrieks. They looked up and saw that 2 of their companions had collapsed. Their skin was like a weathered rock, having lost all the moisture in their bodies. Kalat and Edmonton glanced at each other and felt a peculiar atmosphere. Both of them stood up at the same time and looked at the table. That milky white holy sword cracked loudly, splintering into countless small pieces. When an outsider picks up that holy sword, God will walk the land again. But what happens if the holy sword shatters? These 2 sentences echoed in the minds of Kalat and Edmonton. The matter was completely in the gaps of their knowledge. For a few seconds, they stared at the shattered holy sword, their expressions dull while they remained speechless. They couldn't believe that the holy sword, which had only been touched by an outsider in the evening, had suddenly shattered. What does this mean? What does it represent? The 2 of them didn't dare to think too deeply about it. They felt as if they had returned to the very beginning. Back then, one of the secret bases of the resistance had been discovered by the lone military. They were raided without any warning, and this resulted in their fathers being killed in that massacre. Their female relatives were abducted and sold to different places. Before receiving the grievous news, the feelings Kalat and Edmonton felt that day mirrored what they felt today. They felt heavy, confused, expectant, and unease, all of them mixing to form an intense pressure. Return to the forest, find the high priest, and figure out the reason. Perhaps, this is the latest revelation from God. Kalat turned his wheelchair and said in a deep voice. Edmonton immediately stood up, saying to his remaining subordinates, "Continue searching for those blasphemers, but do not stay here. Also, instruct the believers outside not to hold any rituals or even pray." The unexpected change in events made him extra vigilant. By him, in the corner of the street where the Cathedral of Waves was located. Holding a stack of white folded paper, Danitz turned his head to the side, feeling a mix of nervousness, worry, and puzzlement. "You mean that I'm to post them in different parts of the street and finally post it on the main door of the Cathedral of Waves?" He was very afraid that the door of the cathedral would suddenly open and a group of fist-brandishing priests and bishops would rush out, immediately attacking them without even asking why he had posted the poster. Klein maintained his coldness and said, "Yes." His original plan was to hand the matter of sea god Calvetua over to Mr. Hanged Man, so that he could warn the Church of Storms. However, considering that he still held the secret of Bansi Harbor, and he might even have reported the matter, it would be easy for him to arouse suspicion with another piece of important information in such a short period of time. As for the solution, it was very simple. He could post a few posters on the mandated Punisher's front door so that they could see it as soon as they came out. There was a small problem with Klein's plan. He couldn't tell which of the shops around the Cathedral of Waves was the cover identity of the mandated Punishers. All he could do was make Danitz work a little harder and stick the posters everywhere in prominent spots, including, but not limited to, the front door of the Cathedral of Waves. I should have run away earlier. Why would I think that this fellow had saved my life? Perhaps I would have been converted into gold pounds if he were any other powerful adventurer. No, who would have imagined that this lunatic would so easily resolve the sea god's curse? Fleeing might put me in an even worse state. While lamenting inwardly, Danitz unrolled the pile of white paper and casually glanced at the content. After Letitia Dolera and company entered and left the sea god's ruin in Simeem Island, they were pursued by the resistance. Meanwhile, Kalat and the resistance were trying to sell a strange bone sword that looked a little bent. Sea god Calvetua's body is on the brink of collapse with an extremely deranged mental state. Danitz froze for 2 seconds, then he subconsciously glanced at Gehrman Sparrow. I can understand the first few statements, but why is there a mention of sea god Calvetua being on the brink of collapse and in an extremely deranged mental state? How does Gehrman Sparrow know? Did he discover a problem when he was dealing with the sea god's curse? And how did he deal with the sea god's curse? The organization behind him is more powerful than I thought. Could it be that it's similar to the Aurora Order, in which they serve a real deity? The more he thought about it, the more Danitz trembled in fear. The first time he heard of the Aurora Order had originated from a robbery at sea. Back then, it was the first time he saw his captain's serious expression. After that, he was taught some so-called general knowledge of the mysterious world. Klein responded to Danitz with an emotionless gaze. In the poster, he had eliminated any subjective assumptions, and he had only described the matters that could be confirmed with certainty, so as to not interfere with the judgment of the higher-ups in the Church of Storms. Among them, the content regarding an important item that Letitia and company had taken away was excluded. The Lost Temple was changed to a broader and more inclusive sea god ruin. The base was obviously abandoned by Kalat and the others after realizing that something had happened to the sea god, so it was also left unmentioned. Danitz suddenly retracted his gaze, afraid to look any further. Captain said that the more secrets someone has, the more dangerous they are. He thought for a while and worriedly said, if we stick it on the front door of the cathedral, it will definitely garner immense attention from the Church of Storms. Will they discover that I was the one who did it? Klein gave a terse answer. Yes. Danitz forced a smile and said, then wouldn't I be in grave danger? Klein used his clown ability to control his expression and calmly replied, you were already a pirate who has a bounty for your head. Do you think you can swagger down the main streets of Byam now? Klein lampooned inwardly. That's true. No matter what, they will still capture me and claim my bounty. No, there's something wrong with that. Danitz blurted out, but my bounty will increase. Klein looked at him, but he didn't say anything. All he did was grin a little. For a moment, Danitz thought he heard a rhetorical question. Isn't this a good thing? A good thing for a donkey to kick. With a dry chuckle, Danitz took the pile of posters and, taking advantage of the heavy winds and late night, posted them in prominent spot on the street near the Cathedral of Waves. It really looks like posting a small advertisement. Klein, who had one hand in his pocket, observed from afar and commented inwardly. He sighed and thought, it's good to have an assistant. At least, I don't have to do something that tarnishes my reputation. If I were in Tingen or Backland, if something like that had happened, the scene was too beautiful to imagine. Danitz finally reached outside the Cathedral of Waves, plastered the poster on the front door, clenched his fist, and pounded on the door. After finishing all of this, he turned around and ran, as if there were 10 mandated punishers running after him from behind. Klein didn't dare to be negligent. He pulled out a paper figurine, shook it off, and burned it to ashes before briskly walking to another street. After his recent encounters with the mandated punishers, he had a deep understanding of their style, and he didn't dare to be the slightest bit careless. It was only when they were far away from the Cathedral of Waves that they slowed down and regained their normal walking speed. Danitz had a good constitution, his face wasn't flushed nor was he panting. He was slightly puzzled and asked, why didn't you just write to the police or throw it in the Governor-General's office? Before Klein could reply, he had already realized why. That's right, the lower-ranking police and the staff of the Governor-General's office are locals. They might very well pity the resistance or might be clandestine believers of Sea God. As they were talking, they turned a corner and saw an extremely large red building in front of them. The inside was brightly lit and music could be heard from within. People and carriages streamed in and out the door. It didn't exude any vibes that it was late at night. We actually ended up walking here. After a second of hesitation, a smile appeared on Danitz's face, a smile that all men understood. Red Theater? Klein, who was rich in theoretical knowledge, suddenly came to a realization. Danitz laughed mischievously. This is one of the most famous places in the entire Sonia Sea. There are mysterious and flirtatious Balam girls, passionate Fainapotter girls, open and alluring Intis maidens, tall and graceful Fasak ladies, conservative and quiet lone women, gentle and docile natives. This fellow knows a lot. He comes often? Klein swept a glance at Blazing and said nothing. For some reason, Danitz felt as though he had been seen through, and he immediately laughed awkwardly. This is what pirates talk about when bragging. I've only been here a few times. I didn't have much money in the past. I could only find some average ones, and it's mainly in the area of the Fog Sea. Afterward, I joined the Golden Dream. No wonder. Although Vice Admiral Iceberg's men receive quite good employment perks and often get to share in the treasure, it's still quite difficult to save up a few houses and buy 'em. Compared to the typical pirate, this guy at least knows temperance and saves his money. Klein thought in enlightenment. Danitz didn't wish to continue on the topic as he changed the topic. There are a lot of street girls in Byam, especially there. He pointed into the distance and said, there was once a pirate who did an experiment. He randomly knocked on a family's door, produced some money, and requested to do it with the mistress once. In the end, 3 to 4 families out of the 10 agreed. TSK, if it's someone like you, who has the standard lone look, almost no one will refuse you. They might secretly hide their daughters to prevent you from discovering her. Heh, Lone's Navy would commit many murders and rapes here every year. They aren't any better than the pirates, but they would only be sent back to the country, and pay some small fines. Klein listened quietly, and he suddenly thought back to the evening when the believers of the sea god were praying around the pool. He thought back to their feverish and numb faces. Backland, within the Odora family's villa. Emlyn White, who had taken the initiative to expose certain problems about himself, nervously followed Cosme underground. He once again arrived in the grey stone hall where the black iron coffin was kept. Esteemed Lord Nibs, why have you summoned me? Although Emlyn had rehearsed this scene in his mind dozens of times, he still couldn't completely remove the tension and apprehension in his heart. In this state, he suddenly understood a problem. From the viewpoint of theater studies, the role he was acting as should hide his worries and fears. There's no need for any special concealment. I did well. Emlyn was suddenly much calmer. A deep, aged voice sounded from the coffin that was covered with symbols and magic labels. To reward you. For the ancestor, you risked your life to pray to the fool. Although you didn't receive a response, you bore an enormous risk. This is an act that needs to be rewarded. Here is an acceptance draft for £7,000, a reward for you. I didn't give it to you in a timely fashion due to the great smog of Backland, but it's never too late. At the same time, you must always be aware of yourself and not relax. If anything abnormal happens, immediately inform Cosme. He really gave me money. Emlyn almost forgot to close his mouth. Even when Emlyn White left the Odora family's underground region, he still found things surreal. He couldn't believe that he could so easily be rewarded with £7,000. The acceptance draft was light and weightless in his hand, but he felt the absurdity of reality. The hanged man's method was really effective. Instead of exposing me and punishing me, Lord Nibs gave me a generous reward. And this was done solely to feign ignorance while encouraging me to make attempts so that he can observe in secret. Are the thoughts of the sanguine that complicated as well? Emlyn sighed, his mind feeling adrift. Quickly, he stopped his thoughts from wandering and turned his attention back to the reward of £7,000. With this, I can buy that baron's remains from the hanged man and concoct it into a potion. I'll soon become a baron, sanguine baron, Lord Emlyn White. Emlyn's eyes lit up as his footsteps turned significantly brisk. Within the sanguine, if one wasn't bestowed the corresponding ritual by the elders, they would remain stuck at the same level they were at during birth. It was almost impossible to rely on time to advance. Unless one was extremely lucky, having an ancestor of the family that was nearing the end of their lifespan such that they had no choice but to bestow their powers to a descendant through a ritual, most of Emlyn's sanguine peers would remain stuck in the concept of adulthood. There might not be any chance of them obtaining an aristocratic title for decades. Emlyn's father and mother had lived for years, but they had yet to become barons up this very day. They couldn't even see any hope of becoming one. As Emlyn walked out the door, he couldn't help but glance at the nearby Cosmiodora. This elderly sanguine who has been active in the Roselle era has only been a baron up to this day. And I am about to reach this rank as well. One day, I will become a sanguine marquis like Lord Nibs. No, a duke, or even a prince. Only by doing so will I be able to shoulder the responsibility of being the sanguine's messiah. Yes, the baron's remains is only about 4,000 pounds, I'll have a lot of money left. I can even buy a few more dolls and give them some new clothes. Emlyn unconsciously straightened his back and began to walk more and more proudly. In the Berg household in the City of Silver, Derek lit some candles and prepared for the sacrificial ritual. The lightning frequency alternated several times before he finally found an opportunity. He was very sure that the chief wasn't be able to keep an eye on him at this moment, because he had left the City of Silver with the little boy, Jack, who had recovered somewhat, and a group of explorers, in search for the so-called route that led from the coast to the destroyed city. It didn't take long for Derek to set up everything and say Mr. Fool's honorific name in a reverent, low voice. He very skillfully and methodically sacrificed the Spirit Eater's stomach pouch needed by Miss Magician, and the Beyonder ingredients designated by Mr. Hanged Man, to the ruler above the grey fog. There were many cracks on the City of Silver's solid city walls, but they were filled to the brim with black hard soil. Strands of dense weeds grew on them, swaying in the wind like human hair. All of a sudden, all of them stood up as if they wanted to capture something, but they turned limp without any strength left in them. Early morning, at the Cathedral of Waves. Alger Wilson, who had come to collect the bounty, heard an important piece of news from the diocese bishop, Chogo. Letitia Dolera of the Moses Ascetic Order had disguised herself as an archaeologist and entered the depths of the jungle on Simeem Island. It was unknown what she did that inflicted grievous injuries to sea god Calvetua, who had been in hiding for years, pushing it to the verge of collapse. As a result, it was frantically searching for an opportunity to survive. Rumor has it that this evil spirit which calls itself Sea God had been discovered by two powerful cardinals of the military a long time ago. After it was defeated by them through the use of a sealed artifact, it could only barely escape and hide. This situation has persisted for more than 100 years. Without any intrinsic changes, why would it suddenly collapse and be unable to maintain its existence? Alger frowned slightly, wondering what the difference was. A situation deliberately created by the Moses Ascetic Order? But why didn't they do so in the past 100 years? To complement one of their other plans? Between speculation and doubt, Alger suddenly became aware of an important factor. The biggest and most fundamental difference between the last 100 years and now was that the world had come to buy him. Fool's adorer had come to the Rosted archipelago. Does his appearance anywhere indicate that something big is about to happen or is brewing? Previously, it was the Great Smog of Backland, and there was the abnormality in Bansi Harbor. Now, there's the dying struggle of sea god Calvetua and the unknown plot of the Moses Ascetic Order. No, to be precise, wherever a major problem is brewing or about to happen, Mr. Fool's adorers will be there. They accept Mr. Fool's arrangements and pursue the activities of those secret organizations, the evil gods, and angels. As soon as his train of thought changed, Alger was suddenly enlightened, feeling as though he had grasped the truth. It's not that things happen wherever the world is, but that the world and the other adorers will appear when something is about to happen. What good does this bring to Mr. Fool? Is it a plot solely to destroy the enemy's schemes, or does it help him lift his seal and release more power? Alger held back his doubts and decided to seize the opportunity to submit some intel from before. He clenched his right hand into a fist and pressed it against his left breast. He said with a look of hesitation, "Your Excellency, while pursuing the remnant forces of steel, I heard a piece of intel." "What is it?" Chogo had originally planned to send this bishop-ranked captain out into the sea to search for traces of the resistance, but he was forcibly interrupted by him. For a moment, he felt irritated. Alger recalled and said, "Someone mentioned Bansi Harbor in a conversation. They mentioned that an abnormality had happened there, but the descendants of the Medici family were well hidden and didn't end up being discovered. Bansi Harbor, abnormality. Chogo took a step forward and pressed, what else did they say? Other than mentioning that there was a fallen bishop of the church, nothing else. Your Excellency, is the Medici family a dark family of the fourth epoch? Alger asked deliberately. Chogo's expression sank. That's not something you should know. I'll report it to His Eminence Cotman at once. Cotman was a Church of Storms cardinal, the Archbishop of Rorstad, a high-ranking deacon of the mandated punishers, and the true ruler of the Beyonder world in the archipelago, John Cotman. Chogo thought for a moment before asking, who was the person who mentioned this? What does he look like? Alger was long prepared. I don't know them, and they never showed up again. I remember that the person mentioning Bansi Harbor and the Medici family was an ordinary-looking, young man with a thin face, a broad forehead, black eyes, and black hair. He wore a monocle. He seemed to notice that I was eavesdropping, but he didn't show any anger. Instead, he smiled at me. Alger had been describing Blasphemer Amon. He wanted the cardinals to believe that the exposure of the secret regarding the Medici family and Bansi Harbor was the result of a struggle between the kings of angels. This is really a suitable person to use as a reason. He wouldn't appear to defend himself, and even if he did, no one would believe it. And clearly, any divination regarding him would have zero results. If Beyonder means are used to confirm my information source, there will be strong signs of interference from Mr. Fool, and they won't be able to get an accurate answer. From the looks of it, this is equivalent to what Amon did. Alger thought with considerable relief. Chogo nodded lightly. Find these people and trace the whereabouts of the resistance. Yes, Your Excellency. Alger answered with a look of piety and struck his right fist on his left breast. Dark clouds covered the sky as the rain fell down in torrents, creating white fog in the process. In the port of Byam, the blue water rose slowly but firmly, and the freighters and liners rocked like leaves fluttering in midair. The rain continued to fall, and the sea level gradually approached the dike. The city was flooded with water in many places, and the environment was greatly suppressed. One by one, the fanatical and numb locals, in their taraba shirts and tattered jackets, came to the edge of the cliff or the dike before jumping into the sea. Their flesh and skin rapidly lost moisture as they fell, and they were already desiccated corpses by the time they fell into the sea. A group of people were rioting as they hugged a Navy sailor who was walking out of a base. They angrily bit him to death with their teeth, reducing him to a mangled, bloody mess, and caused chaos on the streets. Whoosh! Boom! The dike collapsed, and the rising seawater poured into Byam City. When Klein jolted awake, his mind was filled with the scene from his dream. For a seer, this was a very clear revelation. Sea god Calvetua has failed to find a way to survive and has completely given up, resulting in it going completely mad. It wanted to create a storm, stir up a tsunami, and drown the Rorstad archipelago so that countless can join it in death. At the same time, its devotees are starting to do extreme acts. I've already informed the Church of Storms. They'll likely be able to stop it. No, even if I didn't inform them. They'll definitely be able to sense a problem with the appearance of such a situation. They would then make the necessary response. Klein rolled to his feet, wore his clothes, and walked out of his bedroom. He saw blazing Danet standing by the window, looking out. He saw the clouds hanging low as rain poured down, as though it was endless. A sign has appeared? Klein walked over to Danitz, who was also looking out at the repressive weather. He could faintly hear the abnormal sound of the tide. In the midst of silence, the sound of explosive thunder suddenly rang out in the air. The leaden-colored clouds quickly split apart, and the falling rain lost its source. In the direction of the docks, everything returned to normal. The morning sun shone down from high up in the sky, bathing Byam in holy light. Danitz hissed and said to himself, John Cotman changed the weather. John Cotman, the Church of Storms cardinal and high-ranking deacon of the mandated punishers? He suppressed Calvetua's powers? Klein retracted his gaze while in thought. Danitz heaved a sigh of relief. I was rather worried just now. Heh, afraid that the sea god who's on the brink of a breakdown would create a disaster. But there's John Cotman. Seeing that Gehrman Sparrow was silent, he continued adding, at sea, even the king of the 5 seas and Queen Mystic won't be his equal. Captain said he's a sequence 3 demigod. The potion's name is... It's... Sea King.